So, Jimmy, it is game day, right? Let's go.
Little dress rehearsal Thursday. I love it.
No, there's no dress rehearsal, buddy. You're making your fans pay full price for preseason. It's all on. It is here. Let's go. Load up the car. Get on 74.
Get those grills ready.
Start driving. Go right past Shelbyville. Take a look to your left. See the backyards of Country Club Heights. Pay homage. Childhood home of Jake Query. Well, at least for the first 5 years that I was alive. Keep driving. Go down. See the exit for Sunman and Milan. Marveled over the fact that the Milan miracle actually happened from a team that was in Ripley County. Believe it or not, keep driving. Go past the area where all of a sudden you realize the rolling hills are nestled with William Henry Harrison's tomb. You've now crossed over into Ohio, and you're in the area that was deeded to William Henry Harrison for his efforts in overtaking the Indiana Territory and defeating Tecumseh. Keep driving. And all of a sudden, you're right there in the Queen City, Cincinnati. And yes, don't worry about the fact, don't think about the fact that the Colts, while making that drive, are game planning for the second stringers of the Cincinnati Bengals. And that they're not actually probably going to see starters, and Anthony Richardson's going to be going against guys that are playing for their careers. That's okay. It's preseason football, baby, and it's game number 3. Let's go. It's on. It's here. Thursday night game night. But there is a lot to talk about, and this is a team, Jimmy, still, when you have a quarterback that is getting his footing, still learning his way through, every snap is important. Every routine is important. You know, it kind of goes back to, it's too bad we don't have the bad analogy sounder. Oh, we do have the bad analogy sounder, but unfortunately, Eddie not here today. Corbin Lingenfelter is capably filling in. Corbin probably is not aware that we use the fish guy with the vacuum cleaner anytime that I use a bad analogy.
And I don't know that that's been added to the permanent board. I think Eddie had it off to the side as just a, break glass in case of emergency.
Understandably so.
So, Corbin, you're set up for failure.
But yesterday, I was playing a round of golf. Yes, I have always said I wasn't going to be that guy that talks about golf all the time. But I'm learning the game of golf, and I'm not very good. But I'm learning it by playing every Wednesday. And now, Jimmy, you've been playing lately, right?
Yeah, I try to play once a month, but I've been taking lessons actively for the last 6 weeks.
So I had one shot yesterday. You tell me if this ever happens to you. I had a shot where I think it was my approach basically, and the iron hits the dirt just behind the ball, and as a result, like it just barely skips the ball and it goes like 2 feet.
Oh yeah, all the time.
Okay. So I had one of those yesterday.
To be clear, not a good golfer by any stretch, but I like playing.
So Dr. White, who I'm golfing with, says to me, I'm like, man, can I just do that one over? And he goes, yeah. He's like, look, we're not playing for money, and we're not in the PGA here. Like, this is, you need these reps. There was one time where I got it into a trap, and he's like, if you wanted to, you can drop out of there, but you might as well swing out of there because you need to learn to do these sorts of things, right? So I did. My point being, it was not game reality for me, but you have to go through those processes because you never know in an actual situation where you're going to need them. Anthony Richardson is still at that point. He is way more talented a football player than I am a golfer, obviously. But he is still at the point of, yes, some players may not need these practice games, but he needs to be able to go through and see, even if he's going against the second unit of the Cincinnati Bengals, he's got to go through it and go up against it and see the different looks and the different stunts and whatever else, because it doesn't matter the tenacity or the talent level of the player he's going against in these games. It's strictly seeing different looks and getting his own repetition, his own timing down. I mean, that's where we are. And part of that is because I think that would be the case regardless for a second-year quarterback, but essentially a first-year quarterback because he lost 3/4 of his rookie season, essentially. So
17 starts under his belt since college. That's not a big number. Like, you need to take advantage of every opportunity that you can. And even though I argued yesterday, and I still kind of feel this way. The Colts don't have the luxury to feel this way, but that's just how I feel about it. With Anthony Richardson, when you're going up against, from all reports, backups for the Bengals and at some point perhaps third stringers, it undercuts some of how Richardson can be tested. The other side to this as well, Jake, and I think it's less prominent. No one's worried about this. Look, I'm knocking on wood as I even speak it out loud, but like we talk about the way he takes care of his body and him trying to recover back from that injury. And there goes to a larger conversation about, well, if he was to have a setback tonight of any kind, it's against 2s and 3s. So it's just, I feel like there is some aspect of risk versus reward here with playing Anthony Richardson in a game where you're not going up against the elite level competition you would week 1 against the Texans, for example. But I also, it's not lost on me what you're saying and what Matt Taylor said yesterday, which is they don't have the luxury with Anthony Richardson to be able to not give him as many reps as they possibly can because he's only played 4 NFL games.
Right. I mean, there's no doubt, like...
But he should also look good tonight. Like, you're also set up with a higher bar now because of who you're going up against. I'm not saying he can't make mistakes, but, like, if it's against a second unit, I want to see far more positives than negatives tonight. Is that fair?
Okay, I'll use another of my bad analogies here, okay? Yesterday, when we played, by like hole 4, I was into a group. I was hitting the ball pretty good, right? And so I said, because I'm a new golfer, I go, is it common that it kind of takes a minute to get warmed up? And Dr. White's like, yeah, it's why a lot of places will have like a driving range right there so you can hit a few before you go out. Of course, I couldn't. I went straight from here, and we just go.
Also, to tell you the truth, I never do that. But again, that's the difference between an average don't care golfer and a hardcore golfer. The problem is if we were playing like a legit money round, if you will, right? You bogey or double bogey your first or second hole, and now all of a sudden you're chasing against it. The same thing, I think, what you want to see from Anthony Richardson tonight is you want to see him basically at par from the beginning and then getting better as the game goes on. If yesterday's workouts, or actually Tuesday's workouts, were any indication, then the slow start before he then got into rhythm, Richardson may be one of those guys that has to be going at a pace in order to get in rhythm. Like he's better served as a 2-minute drill. Sure. No huddle kind of guy. Sure.
So in the Indianapolis 500, and by the way, that is the voice of Jimmy Cook. My name is Jake Query. Good afternoon to you on a Thursday, and a Colts game day Thursday. We'd mentioned that Corbin is in for Eddie. Eddie on his way down to Cincinnati, the drive that I just mentioned. He is going to be watching the game tonight. Took the day off, so Corbin is capably sitting in today. It is Query and Company here on 93.5 and 107.5 The Fan. We thank you for joining us today. James Boyd going to join us coming up at 1 o'clock. We'll talk about this. The big topic of conversation is going to be this game tonight. We will talk to an ESPN reporter, the Stephen Holder of Cincinnati, if you will. Ben Baby's going to join us at 2 o'clock. And then a guy that's going to make you the smartest guy around the water cooler, Jeff Ratcliffe, at 2:30. And I'll tell you how he is going to do that in just a bit. But when we were out in the month of May, Jimmy, we did the show for the week of practice at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway before the 500.
One of my favorite weeks of the year.
And one of the things that took place earlier in the week is the rookie orientation, where rookie drivers have to go out and they've got to do like 20 laps under the watchful eye of IndyCar officials. They do 20 laps between like 150 and 175 miles an hour. Then once they do that, then they up them to 175 to 200, and they do it incrementally until finally they are turned loose and they've passed rookie orientation. When you talk to drivers, they will tell you, oh, the hardest laps are the ones when you're doing like 190. What? You're doing 240 miles an hour on the straight at full speed, and you're telling me 190 is scarier? Oh, absolutely. Why? Well, because the cars are designed to go 240. So when you are doing 190, the car's spitting and belching and trying to get itself up to speed, and the balance of it isn't totally there. Then once you get to 240, it sticks to the ground, and it's like glue, and it's like being just on a slot. Like, it just goes. Anthony Richardson right now is an IndyCar. He is, when they get into the 2-minute drill and they're humming along and they're just firing and you're going off instinct of just rip and run, that's when he is most comfortable. But in terms of slowing it down and being in the pocket and letting the play develop for a second and going through reads and making the precise throw, he's capable of those things. But by design, he is still a 240, throw it out there at full speed. That's where I'm most comfortable. So what the Colts need to do and what they will continue to work to do is to make sure that he is equally comfortable in those initial outset drives where they're doing 190 miles an hour, because you can't afford to get down early with a couple of bogeys and then you're playing catch-up the whole time. They've got to maximize these early starts to games, and that's part of what tonight is.
When you brought up a great point the other day, Jake, and it counteracts well with your point about him not getting off to a slow start. The only way that's acceptable, and I'm not talking about tonight as much as I am during the regular season, the only way it's acceptable for him to get out to slow starts is if the defensive look that we saw in joint practices against the Cardinals and the defensive look that everybody reported on against the Bengals, which is limiting red zone opportunities for cashing in by Joe Burrow and making consecutive stops, and Jalen Jones looking like the high-level corner that Chris Ballard believes him to be. If this is a defense that's going to be able to bail you out, which it's far too early to say one way or another if they are, but if they're able to bail you out, those slow starts become more manageable. To your point, if the defense doesn't do that, then those slow starts can really bite you, because now as a quarterback, especially a de facto rookie quarterback, you're pressing, you're forcing things more because you feel like, well, I had a bad opening drive, the defense just gave up 6, and now I need to go make a play. Tonight, we will not come in here tomorrow and say the season is lost if Anthony Richardson struggles tonight. But I would like to see a more accurate, a more concise, and the phrase I've used a lot the last couple of weeks, comfortable Anthony Richardson out of the gate tonight, especially when everybody's fighting for their roster spot on the Bengals side for the second unit and third unit. I get that. But because it's second and third unit guys, I want to see a level of poise and command from Anthony Richardson that we have only seen in days during camp. And I think that's attainable. I think a lot of it also goes back to, Jake, if Josh Downs is not available week 1, which we still don't know where he trends, you've seen a lot of A.D. Mitchell in the slot. This is another opportunity for him getting more reps in that position and that chemistry building with Anthony Richardson.
Going to be interesting to see what happens at the tight end position as well. These are the things that we'll talk about over the course of the day. I like this on, I still say Twitter. Is that okay?
Yeah, I still do.
I know it's X, but hey, Jake, the roof's open at Lucas Oil Stadium. Too bad it's not a home game. They're just going to put that. We've now opened it for 19 games in the time that we've had the stadium for an additional $113 million. One of them was when they were in Cincinnati. That's cool. It was open. Here's a question. Sometimes, Jimmy, you know I'm an insomniac, right?
Yes, I do.
So, because occasionally you'll get a text or an email or something from me that's at like 2:30 in the morning.
Yes.
I try not to text because then I think, well, what if your phone – although it is funny to me when people are like, I got a text and it woke me up. What?
Doesn't happen for me.
Just put the phone on silent?
I don't have the ringer on.
Yeah, I mean, although I guess maybe some people do have a ringer on in case something happens in an emergency in the middle of the night.
Sure.
I get it.
I should. I'm not being very responsible there.
But I'm sitting last night and I'm scrolling through the news. I have a routine that I do both before bed and like first thing in the morning where I just scroll through. There's a number of different places that I look and I to check for sports news, world news, whatever. And I see this column and I know, and it is not my interest, it is not my desire, it certainly is not my intention here. So to talk. I think the dumbest thing that you can do on a sports talk radio show is talk about politics. I just do.
Yeah.
There are times where social issues, I think, necessitate for people to be made aware of certain things. And I have always tried to use this microphone for people that don't have a microphone of their own or a voice of their own. And if there is some sort of attention that needs to be pointed out to a group of people that I feel it's necessary for their uplift or to point out something where someone is being, held down or something, I'll do that. But But for the most part, when it comes to politics, people aren't tuning into this program to hear politics, and they certainly don't trust my opinion on it because the reality is I don't have that sort of intellect. But I am curious of this, and it's not a political question. It's rather just simply an observation that I found amusing. I'm reading this article, and it's talking about with the big upcoming election. And I don't know if you know this or not, but there's an election in, I think, November.
Really?
Yeah. And so it's talking about the undecided voters. Lots of attention to the undecided voters, and they got to get the undecided voters. And both parties are really going after the undecided voters.
Got to grab those independents.
And then I thought to myself, who in the world is undecided at this point? I mean, it's not like it's not like you're sitting there and you're looking at two candidates or two parties that really have a lot of cross-pollination and ideological similarity. There's a pretty big chasm between the two philosophies.
Do you think independent people just want to be on TV? Because those are always the ones that get interviewed. Like, do you think that's what it is?
I'm just hoping to come on this town hall meeting and be on cable television. But literally, I just couldn't imagine that there are people that are like, I mean, this has been a nonstop conversation in the American lore for obviously politics always have been, but more so than ever the last however many years. And I couldn't get past the fact that there are people out there really that are like, I need more information. Huh? It's literally like the most polarizing period ever. I just, what I mean?
Well, unless you're one of those people that goes out of your way to avoid.
It's like game 160 of the Major League Baseball season. You're like, I need a little more time to find out if my team's any good.
I don't know. I mean, they could make a World Series push. They might lose in the first round.
Right.
Who's to say? You think it's people that tune it all out until like November? Then they're like, well, I need to figure it out.
That's entirely possible.
Because a lot of people are just so fed up with all of it that it's like, I'm going to tune it all out, and then we'll see what's going on. And
Understood.
November.
It was weird to me. I'm like, wait a minute, these people are out there? It just seems weird to me, right? Did you also see that your Cleveland Guardians and the Milwaukee Brewers, in our beer battle, they refused to take hold of the situation, right?
Nobody wants to take the driver's seat towards victory of the beer bet.
I thought for sure. I've been waiting for a while now.
I hope this comes down to game. I hope it comes down to the final game. I really do. I hope we're looking at 162 and it's right down to the wire. I really hope that it's like it's the final day of the regular season for this beer bet. Nothing made me happier. Even if I wind up losing, I want it down to the final day. Wouldn't that be great? Like we picked these teams randomly and all of it's going to be established on one final game. I think that'd be awesome. We can both say that because we're both basically tied right now.
But here's the thing. Really,
for those that don't know, Jake and I
realistically, we don't really have that much on the line.
No, we don't.
I don't, at least, because I don't win anything other than I don't have to buy you anything because we went double or nothing.
Correct.
Right?
That's fair. Yeah.
So for me, I'm like, well, and the irony being that it's the Brewers that can save me from then not getting any beer out of this.
Yeah.
But for those that are unaware, go ahead.
Yeah, so we made a selection of teams that were projected to win, I think, less than 80 or 90 games. Eddie, myself, and Jake participated in it. And on the line was, like a 12-pack of beer or a 6-pack of beer. I can't remember what it was. But it was a carryover from we did the same thing in the hockey season, and I won that one. So we did double or nothing in this regard. Eddie had first pick. He picked the Marlins. So we've, given jabs of him when he's here. We'll save that for when he's back in the office to give him more jabs. But they are a distant third here. Jake picked the Brewers, and I picked the Guardians. And currently neck and neck are Cleveland and Milwaukee, not for playoff spots, not for division titles, for a settlement of a beer bet. And I really hope it winds up coming down to the very end here as the Guardians lose to the Yankees last night and the Cardinals take care of business against the Brewers. So
if you find let me ask you this. If it comes down to it and the Yankees are playing the Guardians and somehow, in our hypothetical here, and the Yankees need to sweep in order to win the division, but in doing so, it would cost you the beer.
In that scenario, I would give up the beer in that scenario. It's purely a hypothetical here because this is the last time they play each other. But if we're entertaining that idea, yes, I would cheer for the Yankees to cost the sweep. I'd rather have a division title over winning the beer bet.
So you're putting team.
Yeah, I'm putting team over need here. Yeah.
Okay, well that's very commendable of you.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
Although as you get older, you should probably go with the beer. I
probably should,
right?
Especially with this particular Yankees team because I know inevitably Clay Holmes is going to blow a save of the ninth and are going to go home and I'll be yelling about Brian Cashman. But anyway, more local news.
How many tight ends tonight will catch a ball?
Ooh. I'm going to say 4 tight ends catch a ball tonight.
And those would be?
Will Mallory.
Okay.
Mo Alley Cox. Kylan Granson.
In Ogletree, right?
Yeah, in Ogletree.
I guess that's the 4?
Yeah. I think 4 tight ends wind up.
Okay, better question would be this. Which tight end is most targeted?
Kylan Granson. I'm very bullish on Kylan Granson now. Small sample size.
It does kind of feel like he's pulling away a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he's necessarily pulling away in terms of he's clear the best tight end in that room, but I keep seeing his name pop up in connection with Anthony Richardson on real-time footage or the box score analysis of it all, which we know isn't fully valid, but you're seeing a clear budding relationship between those two there. So I'll say Granson. What about you?
It goes back to this. I'm very fascinated by this, and I mentioned this before. And I don't really have like tangible, solid evidence for this. It's a little bit of just feel, okay? But it seems to me that Granson is the tight end that has the most versatile skill set of things that you would want out of a tight end.
Yeah.
Mallory, and maybe it's just power of suggestion or thought, but with Mallory, the first couple of plays that we saw of him in preseason play a year ago in particular was him catching the ball and running with it. And I think that we get a little bit also of, well, you know, he looks kind of like Dallas Clark because he's, I mean, I hate to say like, you know, but more so not even necessarily the fact that he's a white guy, but just like his build and his demeanor and his running style. He, you know, and Dallas Clark, when you think of it, was a tight end that you thought of as catching the ball and then turning around and he becomes like basically John Riggins, and he's this running back that is off and running, right? And so whether that's the actuality of Will Mallory, I don't know, but it has felt like that they have thought of him more as the yard after catch receiving, almost like slot tight end. The rest of them, Mo Alley Cox and Jelani Woods, those are guys that they were not tight end first, they were body first.
Mm-hmm.
Man, if you look at that guy's body, he looks like he's going to be a great tight end. So let's use him because he's got a football background or a quarterbacking background or whatever else. And boy, if he can put it together, he's really going to be something, okay? Then you have in Ogletree, I think of Ogletree more in the kind of the Jack Doyle role of he's a good blocker that then can turn around and catch. Like, I mean, we haven't seen a lot of Ogletree, admittedly. Granson, to me, seems to be the hybrid of all of them. Maybe doesn't do any of them exceptionally well, but there is no one area that he's really that really leaves a lot to be desired. And the others have at least one area that leaves you a little bit to be desired. But Granson seems to be the best hybrid amongst all of them, and that's why, because you still don't know. There's one thing about Anthony Richardson that I think benefits that discussion and tends towards Kylan Granson. And I'll tell you what that is next. And then again, James Boyd going to join us top of the hour. Colts Bengals game day here on The Fan. What makes, Jimmy, Anthony Richardson different as a quarterback? I mean, when you're looking at, give me a young quarterback in the NFL off the top of your head. Young player.
Jordan Love.
Jordan Love. What's the difference between, and I'm talking about on tape. Talking about if you're a scouting guru, if you're Chris Ballard and you're looking at which Chris Ballard, who, by the way, by all account, I'm not going to say disliked Jordan Love, but wasn't necessarily sold on Jordan Love when he was coming out of the draft out of Utah State. And Jordan Love ends up in Green Bay. But what's one stylistic style of play, by that I mean, difference between Anthony Richardson and Jordan Love?
I think Anthony Richardson is a far more athletic, can do it with your legs quarterback.
Correct. So, for that reason, it would behoove the Colts to find the tight end. If you go out on any play in a huddle and you know that a play is designed to be a pass play where your tight end is supposed to hold a block for 2 Mississippis and then break into the flat in case things break down. Or if you have a run play that's a draw or whatever else, and you've got to have your tight end standing at the line and blocking. Or if you have a play where you're going out of shotgun and you're sending the tight end out immediately away from the line for an out. Each tight end that the Colts have fits into one of those 3 areas, except for perhaps Kylan Granson, who's the guy that can probably do all 3 more than the others, and thus it may benefit him the most that Kylan Granson is the one that has the most play-on-the-fly capability as a tight end, because if a play is breaking down and Anthony Richardson decides it's go time, Kylan Granson is one that can probably stay in block even if he was initially designed to go out as a receiver. Or if there is a play where Richardson, where you're looking at it and you are showing or stunting like it's going to be a run, and then all of a sudden you go to the pass, Granson can do that as well. I think his versatility, and I'm not saying that he's the most versatile player out there, but I think he might be in offering the most versatile of that tight end group. Couple of comments here from folks. Jeremiah, first off. Well, we'll get to Jeremiah in a second. This one, Cox, Mallory, Granson, Ogletree. Just a bunch of guys you could replace with scrap heap free agent signings. Year 8 of Ballard. It's hard to argue that point, to be honest with you. It really is.
I think you could make a case that any of those names, Cox, Granson, Mallory, etc., could make an NFL roster, but they're not starting in most places where you're replacing a Dawson Knox or a Dalton Kincaid or whoever.
But I also think we are accustomed, and by the way,
or Hunter Henry.
We're accustomed to thinking that the tight end position has been changed a lot by, there have always been great tight ends. Sure. But the tight end position has been changed in the last 15 years probably by, in no particular order and in no particular, starting probably with Jeremy Shockey and then Gronkowski and then, Dallas Clark to an extent, George Kittle.
Travis Kelce,
obviously. Those guys, though, and there's a reason why we look at those guys, but then think about it. Those are all guys that helped their teams win at the ultimate level. So the reason those teams won at the ultimate level is because they had these unicorns at different positions, not just the tight end, but a lot of different positions. In other words, those guys don't grow on trees. So there's a danger sometimes in trying to live by the exception and not the rule. Those guys are the exception of the rule for the most part. And if you're just simply going out trying to live up to and replicate exception, that's what gets you into trouble. But it also creates in the minds of fans and analysts and sports talk geeks, it makes us create a benchmark or a line in the sand that quite frankly, there's a reason that line is even there in the first place because there's only so many of them. But I think that that's the danger here is that we say to ourselves, well, listen, That group of tight ends, that tight end room, those are all just interchangeable players that you can replace in free agency. And I don't disagree with that. But that's what 70% of the league has in their tight end room, right? The tight ends in the NFL are very interchangeable because when you get one that is not part of that interchangeable group, that's what catapults you. And that's why it becomes the benchmark that the rest of the league is looking towards. Because, holy cow, look at what we have here. We have this like hybrid engine that is just incredible. Not everybody has that. And if you have one, you sure as hell aren't letting it go, right? That's why, Brock Bowers looks like he could be that kind of a guy. Now, we don't know going from college to the NFL how things translate, but Bowers looks like he could be that kind of a player. And that's why he was coveted, and that's why teams, allegedly Indianapolis, were making phone calls while they were on the clock, seeing if they can, or while somebody else was on the clock, seeing if they can move up to try to get him. There's a reason for that.
What I've done with this tight end room with the Colts, and again, I want to preface this on the front end. Yes, I'm a Chiefs fan. I get to watch Travis Kelce 17 games a year and then whatever they do in the postseason. I am biased in that regard that I have seen the pinnacle of that position. I'm not asking for that in Indianapolis. Because, Jake, people do that. People do exactly what you outlined. They look at Kittle, they look at Kelce, they look at Bowers right now and they say, see, those are unicorn players. Why can't we have one of those people? That's very hard to find the unicorn. That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for a tight end that leads the team, leads the room, I beg your pardon, because no one's going to outpace Michael Pittman in all honesty, leads the room, the tight end room, in receptions, is your near every down tight end, is your Mike Gesicki, who the Bengals went out and got this offseason because he's an athletic tight end that's been around the league for a long time. The Patriots, even though the tight end I'm about to name, who I mentioned earlier, is well past his prime, they felt a void and they wanted a veteran experience leader in there. They went and got Hunter Henry. Like there are names, once you get done with the Kittles and the Andrews of the world and the Kelces, where you get to the middle of the pack tight ends and you look around the league and you say, well, these guys, these particular starters aren't unicorns, but the Colts don't have that. They don't have that mid to lower tier tight end. They have a lot of guys where maybe I'm missing the plot on this, but if you took any of the tight ends in that room, maybe they'd start in 5 or 6 other spots, but they certainly wouldn't start in the majority of lineups around the league. Take away the Niners and the Chiefs of the world. I'm talking about just your bare bones middle of the pack tight ends. And that's the frustrating thing for me, is that Jack Doyle, regardless of where you want to rank him, I always viewed him as a middle to upper end, not elite, but a middle to upper end tight end. And they've not had anything close to that since he left. That's the part that frustrates me.
Again, Jack Doyle's a funny one because I don't disagree that he was a middle to upper level.
He was good. He wasn't
blocking wise. He was pretty good, right?
Yeah. And that's a whole subset of the tight end room. People will debate you till they're blue in the face about who's better between Kittle and Kelce and Gronk because of how well they block.
Do you consider Hunter Henry a guy with 2 first names?
Yes.
They say you can't trust a person with 2 first names.
I do.
You think Hunter is a common first name?
Yeah.
I guess Hunter Smith, right?
Yeah.
Who's the most famous athlete of all time with 2 first names?
Oh, man.
See, you could say Babe Ruth, but A, I don't think of Babe as typically a man's name, and B, other than Babe Diedrichson, like how many people do you know named Babe? And that wasn't really his name; that was his nickname, right?
Yes.
So I guess George Ruth would count. That would qualify, right?
Yes.
You didn't go by that. He changed it to a name that really isn't a first name.
You don't hear Babe thrown around on the census data.
Correct. That's exactly correct. Corbin, you weighing in?
Yeah, Hank Aaron.
That's a good one.
That's a really good one. Especially if you go, Hank or Henry, either one, right? That's really good.
I'll modernize it. Tom Brady. Because you have Brady's and you have Toms.
Do you think of Brady as a common first name?
Nowadays, I think.
Okay, here's the thing.
Depends if we're making this timeless or not.
Michael Jordan. Do you think of Jordan? Yeah, Jordan's a first name, I guess. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, that's a good one.
I guess Jordan is a common first name to an extent, yeah. My thing is this. You can't, for example, Peyton Manning, like if Peyton Manning's last name was a first name, But there are certain players, Tom Brady being one of them perhaps. Yeah, Brady might be a more common – I guess Brady is a first name. I mean, I worked with a guy named Brady years ago. But you probably hear more of it now because of Tom Brady. You know what I mean?
Right.
I mean, I think I told you when I was in college, some young couple walked up to Damon Bailey with 2 kids, 2 infants, and said, I want you to meet our 2 kids, Damon and Bailey. Now, that would be weird, wouldn't it? If somebody came up to you and they're like, oh, it's our 2 kids, Jimmy and Cook. Wouldn't that kind of freak you out? Like, it's supposed to be a compliment, but wouldn't it kind of freak you out?
But doesn't it work, though, if the person has 2 first names? Because I would argue Bailey's a first name and Damon's
that's
a
what
first.
I mean.
If you take mine, but still, Cook's not a first name.
But it's not coincidence that they named them Damon and Bailey, right?
Correct. It wasn't like on a whim.
Jake, what about Paul George? That's a good one.
Frank Thomas?
Frank Thomas is a good one.
I'm cheating now, by the way. I just Googled. I've gone out of my archive. Now I Googled players with 2
see what
first
happens
names.
here? Players with 2 first names? Is that what you're looking up?
Jeff Gordon?
Yeah, okay. It's funny because you don't think of Gordon as a first name, and then you're like, well, I don't know, the Gordon Hayward, right? Gordon Ramsay.
Tony Stewart?
See, I think it's okay.
Stewart's an older name, like as a first name, but it's
Stewart
still
as a first name is typically Stuart.
That's fair. That is fair.
There's a difference there between first and last name.
Hank Aaron is the most common on these lists.
Michael Jordan's a really good one. I mean, you kind of forget that Jordan. I mean, I know a couple of Jordans, right? Several Jordans. Jordan Patterson, good dude.
And in terms of your criteria of most famous, it's hard to get past Hank Aaron or Michael Jordan. Like that's true. Kind of the top of the heap.
Well, Babe Ruth's way up there too, right?
But if we X him out because Babe doesn't count,
correct.
Then,
I kind of understand. Here's the thing: would he be as famous if it was like, man, remember that Yankee George Ruth? G.H. Ruth?
It's the Babe.
I'll tell you what, G.H. Ruth, that dude was unbelievable. You remember that George Herman? That guy was awesome. Like George Herman Ruth, but that guy was unreal. He sounds like probably because you think of George Herbert Walker, you think of like he should be a president, right?
This is totally a reliable source here, but on this website I'm on that the forum post is athletes with 2 first names. The first poster gives Jordan, but his first name, he went George Ruth. He didn't go Babe Ruth. He put George Ruth.
Now, who's this?
This is random. So this is just a random forum thread I found when I Googled athletes with 2 first names. And on the list, this guy didn't put Babe anywhere. He just went George Ruth, went straight with it.
Yeah, but he didn't go by George. That's a problem, right?
I understand. Right? Yeah, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Pete Rose is also listed on that list.
No, come on, no. Well, here's the other thing. The names have to be gender specific to the person who has them.
Okay.
So Rose is not necessarily a man's first name.
That's fair.
Oh, it is today. Okay, yeah, again, I'm just saying.
The most bizarre one on the list, which I would fight, because it's spelling. It goes back to your spelling thing. Somebody put Jack Nicklaus on there, but the spelling, you're not spelling it like that.
Now, here's another example, okay? Another example. LeBron James. Okay, James, yes, but prior to LeBron, and I'm not taking anything away, but I'm saying it's not like LeBron was a common first name at the time of LeBron James' arrival, right?
Yes.
Do you know that? True story. Here's an excellent question for you. There is a former Pacer who one local writer got curious about the former Pacer's name and went back and traced it and determined that this former Pacer, his mother essentially created the name, because by census record, there was like no record. There was allegedly or apparently, so I shouldn't say created, they found the possibility that there was one person in the early 20th century, turn of the century, with this first name. But the mother, apparently, of this player liked a name or a variation or whatever else and came up with it. And it's not a totally outlandish name.
Yeah.
And this player, it is now actually a borderline, I'm not going to say common first name, but you would not think it is a normalized first name. And by all account, somebody that was an Indiana Pacer was the very first person, at least of the modern era in the United States, to have said first name, and his mother is credited with being the one that was the genesis of the name that is now a relatively common name in the American landscape.
It's a crazy Lou Amundsen story.
I will tell you what player, and we'll get Jimmy's guess on who it is next. Night on like 9 different channels and on marathon form on one of the cable channels 24 hours a day. I feel like it's still somewhat topical. There's a scene in it where Jerry is trying to do the impossible roommate switch. George comes up with the plan on how they can pull off this impossible feat, and which, by the way, I pulled off once in the mid-'90s, if I may. But anyway.
In New York?
Not in New York, but that would have been amazing, right? Because I did live there in that time. But it turns out both roommates are into Jerry, and so the menage becomes a possibility. And George says to Jerry, do you ever thank yourself that you have access to my dementia? Now, sometimes on this show, all of a sudden my brain jerks the wheel into an oncoming lane, and then it takes off and people have fun with it. And I think to myself, to you guys, do you ever thank yourself that you have access to my dementia?
Every day, Jake. Twice on the weekends, because I don't get it those days.
Several people have sent me fabulous names here for athletes with two first names. But again, let me give you an example of one that I would give the big kibosh. LeBron James, for example. Yes, LeBron is a first name, but it's not a common first name, nor do I believe it necessarily was before. I mean, now there are probably a lot, right? Understandably so.
Sure.
But while that is correct, just to have a last name that is also a first name doesn't mean that you have two common first names. Caitlin Clark is a good one.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Jeff George is a good one. Paul Tracy. Okay, this one to me a little bit debatable. Walter Payton. Because Peyton is a first name. Yes, there are some Peytons. Peyton Manning spells it differently than P-A-Y. That one's a little bit
You've also heard other athletes go Peyton. Like Peyton Pritchard just popped into my head. Like there are other modern. I'm just saying you've seen it, right?
Yeah,
You've seen it enough to where maybe it counts.
Here's a good one on the controversial scale. Muhammad Ali. Ali is a first name, but I don't know that Ali is. It is somewhat, maybe, right?
Sure.
Cassius Clay, though, Corbin points out, that would definitely work because Cassius Winston, I mean, there are Cassiuses, right? The player that played for the Indiana Pacers, who it is believed was the first to be named with this first name. Mark Monteith did a deep dive on this and found one person, literally one in the American census from like 1902 that had this first name, but it was spelled differently, and it was an old record that he found, so he wasn't even positive that it was what the name was. Do you have a guess, Jimmy? A former Indiana Pacer whose first name now is a little bit more common, but when you first heard of this player's name, you had never heard the name before, and now it's a little more out there.
For the comedy of it all, no, I don't have a legitimate guess, and it's hard to top Lou Amundsen, so I'll just throw Gogo Batadze out there, but I know that's not the answer.
I did go to a Pacer game once where the guy in front of me was from the country of Georgia.
Really?
He lived in Kansas, but he was a native of Georgia, and he snuck in a Georgian flag.
That's awesome.
And the entire game, and he was kind of a cute little guy, and he was very excited about Gogo Batadze. It was Gogo Batadze's rookie year.
I had dreams
and he just stood up the whole game going, Goga, Goga, the whole game, and Gogo Batadze never got in the game.
I had dreams of a go, ga, go chant through Cambridge Fieldhouse. Never happened.
You know what? He's actually turned into a serviceable NBA player, so maybe they're doing that in Orlando.
Yeah.
The correct answer, I'll do it in David Stern voice from when he was drafted.
Nice.
And I don't know what number pick he was, so I'm kind of guesstimating on the draft number. You ready?
Are you wanting, and this puts him in a bad spot, but are you wanting Corbin to have the draft sound for authenticity, or are you okay to go without?
Do we have the draft
Corbin,
sound,
is it
Corbin?
labeled on there? It would be NFL draft or NBA draft sound.
Corbin's looking through. The long delay sometimes kills the momentum of said
I know.
anonymous sound drops. Okay, expiration date's been
We'll go with
reached.
It's all right.
Okay, here we go. Oh, there we go.
Oh, wow, Corbin.
With the 10th pick in the 1994 NBA draft, the Denver Nuggets select Jalen Rose from the University of Michigan.
Really?
Indeed. It is believed that Jalen, Jalen, that he was the first.
Of that spelling iteration, you're saying? Or just in general? Wow. Man.
I mean, you had female names Jalen.
Sure.
Or Jana-Lynn. Mike Vanderjagt's wife is Jana-Lynn Vanderjagt. But Jalen, J-A-L-Y-N-N, there may have been a few from a female standpoint. Right. But in terms of males named Jalen, if you go back and look, the watershed moment was when Jalen was the mid-'90s when Jalen Rose became a name.
It's funny you say that because now that I think about it, going back to my AAU coverage days with Adidas, I remember plenty of Jalen's on the AAU circuit, but this would have been, again, late 2010s.
I mean, it's a cool name, right?
Right.
Like that's what I mean. It is. You forget that 30 years ago when Jalen Rose hit the scene, it was, and I will tell you this, Jalen Rose to me was he's a very important figure because Jalen Rose is exactly my class. And Jalen Rose, when, here I am, I grow up in suburban Indianapolis. I'm an Indiana fan. I'm a Pacer fan. Bob Knight's Indiana. And Jalen Rose is part of the Fab Five, and they got the baggy shorts and the black socks. And, there's rumors of him getting busted inside of like a drug house in Detroit when he's at Michigan. And, he's getting paid. And he was the face of everything scandalous in my clouded viewpoint. Then he ends up a Pacer. We're the exact same class, exact same age, and actually kind of knew somewhat similar people. So when I was covering the Pacers on a regular basis and was in the locker room on a regular basis, got to know him a little bit, not like hanging out with him, but I remember once running into him at Meijer at like 2 o'clock in the morning, back when I worked in TV, and you'd get off work at 12:30 at night, and I'm doing my grocery shopping, and there's literally the only other person in the aisle is Jalen Rose. And I'm like, oh, hey, and then probably a year ago, I was on a layover somewhere and ran into him, and I don't remember what airport, and he recognized, I mean, it's not like he was like, hey, Jake, but right. I mean, he's like, oh, you're the indie sports guy, whatever. And that was my eye-opening epiphany that we think we know people, but we don't necessarily, and we don't know their backgrounds, and we don't know the things that they may have overcome, and we don't know the things that were the little spices that were part of the ingredient of their upbringing. And in reality, just because we look at the final piece, we say, well, that's not to my taste. And then actually you realize, you know what, this is to my taste, because Jalen Rose is just a flat-out good dude. I mean, Great guy. Like, I loved him. I loved covering him. I loved talking to him. And I found out that we had far more in common than you would have guessed. And the only difference between the two of us to a great extent was the things that I was afforded growing up that he was not, and the things that he went through that I did not. But in reality, we were just two guys that were of the same age, and we're at Meijer at 2 o'clock in the morning. He was a good dude. Liked him. Another good dude, James Boyd, going to join us just about 4 minutes from now. Colts Bengals, we'll get into it next. Look at Corbin spinning the hits, man. I feel like I'm on the treadmill. I like it. Let's get fired up. It's a Thursday. It's game day. You're going to see starters for a quarter and a half. The Bengals, Joe Burrow is going to be hanging out, going to Gold Star Chili, or which chili place do you prefer down there, Jimmy?
Skyline's the answer, right?
Yeah, Skyline's got like kind of a brown, sugary type feel to it. Not a fan. Gold Star's decent. I don't know if it's even still around, but
the only, and I realize this doesn't matter. I'm in Indianapolis. What am I apologizing for? The only Cincinnati staples I know of are LaRussa's Pizza and Skyline Chili. That's all I can do.
A Cincinnati staple, and we'll see if James Boyd could certainly pull off a look from here. He joins us now, by the way, and I'm sure thrilled to be doing so on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. James from The Athletic. You also hear him on this radio station frequently. I told Eddie about the hat store that I told Stephen Holder about. It's literally 100-year-old custom-made fedoras and different stylish hats in downtown Cincinnati, and Eddie is on his way down there. And I told Eddie, I said, you got to go to the hat store. Problem is they charge by the foot for the materials. Eddie would be bankrupt with his size 9.5 head.
I mean, yeah, you can't set ourselves up for financial failure like that.
James Boyd, I'm guessing you strike me as a guy that could pull off the look of a stylish kind of old school hat. Would you do it? Would you rock it?
I think I could pull off anything because I'm just that handsome.
There it is. Yes, I
like that. The confidence is what says it all, right?
The press reporter hat for James Boyd.
That's kind of what the one that I have kind of looks like that.
Yeah.
But I'm telling you, it's a Greek store. Batsaki's is what it's called in downtown Cincinnati, and you go in and like it just is cool, man. You go in and literally you feel like there's two guys discussing whether or not like Rocky Marciano is going to win the big fight or Sugar Ray Robinson's better. I mean, it's great. Okay, James, let's talk about the fight of tonight between the Bengals and the Colts. Bengals not expected to play many starters, correct?
Correct.
And that affects, or does it at all, how much does that askew the lens through which Chris Ballard is able to evaluate and assess players? Or is it disadvantaged because you are seeing guys that are not going against the real deal?
I think there's still something beneficial to it, especially for Anthony Richardson to just get some more live reps. I don't care who it's against. I think that he needs to play more football. As far as evaluating the rest of the roster, I think at this point you probably have a good idea of who you want to keep and who you're looking at probably letting go. But at the same time, you keep an eye out on things. But I think at this point you're just trying to figure out who's that 53rd, 52nd, 51st guy on your team versus obviously some of the other guys who I think have solidified their position. For example, Anthony Gould, the 5th-round pick, rookie, I think he's a lock to make the team whether anything happens tonight.
James, I've been of the camp that with Anthony Richardson, you can't make fair evaluations until the games matter because at that point, the kid gloves are off, there's no snap count restrictions, and you know you're going up against the top tier of the opposing depth chart, right? You're not going up against the 2s or the 3s. That said, regardless of what happens tonight, I'm not going to come in here tomorrow thinking, oh, man, the Colts made a mistake drafting Anthony Richardson. That's not even on the table for me. But from an observational standpoint, if he does struggle tonight, what's a fair bar to hold him to, given the fact that he is going up against Cincinnati backups?
I think a fair bar would be if he isn't able to move the ball on any of the drives he's out there. For example, if they go, 3 and out to start, come back, get maybe one first down, off the field again, but they're never able to really get into opponent's territory. And really, if they're not able to score, then I would be kind of questioning, like, okay, what's going on? How's he feeling? And is this just part of the process when it comes to him getting reintegrated into football? Now, we're not going to see, all of the Colts' best play calls and best schemes tonight. However, again, as you alluded to, Jimmy, you're a starter. So, in my opinion, any starting quarterback in the NFL should be able to move the ball down the field, at least one drive if you get like 3 or 4 of them.
James, you ever go to an NFL game or a Major League Baseball game, and up on the video board, like during a timeout, they have one of those things where, like, fans, it's time for the race, the green section, the yellow section, and they got the 4 little dots that have to do a little race, and the crowd gets all excited, and they keep edging, and you don't know which section actually is going to be the winner. You know what I'm talking about on these things, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's based on my cheers, though, right? It's not pre-done. It's based on how loud
That's exactly right. Like, get a little bit louder, section 300.
Yep.
So I feel like the tight end chase is that. Literally, you just don't know which one is in the lead, and then another one does, another one, and it just oscillates back and forth. Realistically, is that whatever tight ends the Colts end up keeping, is that how it's going to be, where we have a situational tight end room, or is there one that they're going to say, you know what, that's the guy, he's our starter, he's our reps, and the others are simply there in relief?
I think that it is a bit more defined than maybe people want to admit. I know some of the fan base, every time I talk about Mo Cox, they're like, cut him, we could save some money. And I'm like, no, he's the best tight end on the team. He's the most valuable one for this group. They're going to be a run-heavy group. He's the best blocker of the group, and he occasionally makes a couple big catches. So I think that their starting tight ends are going to be Mo Cox and Colin Granson, who's probably the best pass-catching tight end on the team, and then we'll see Will Mallory and Drew Ogletree kind of fit in around them. Obviously, Jelani Woods is hurt right now. We'll see if he makes the 53-man roster. But at the same time, I don't think that it's going to be some huge rotation of tight ends. I think it's going to be those main two guys, Kylan Granson and Mo Cox.
If Jelani Woods had not had the injury and presumably is going to go on to an IR, would they have kept all five?
That's a great question. I'm going to say yes, mainly because it looked like even before the injury, Jelani might have been the odd man out. And I just don't think they would have pulled the plug on a 2022 third-round pick. Because if you do that, in my opinion, you're basically saying your time here is done. We whiffed on this pick. And who knows? They might have whiffed anyways, but I think they probably would try to give him one more chance, one more year to get it right, mainly because he's also an older player. Jelani's going to turn 26 this year, so at some point, the whole upside potential thing, kind of runs its course because, how many players in any sport get better when they're turning, into their late 20s?
So then Jelani Woods, would he have the same job security had he been selected in round 5 or 6?
I don't think so, no.
Which is interesting because when you think about it, and I get it. You got to give as much time as possible before you realize that you truly are punting on something that you invested in. But realistically, James, is that a dangerous way to go about business?
It is, but I think that is the reality of business in any field, to be honest. How many of us have worked jobs and you see this person get promoted or this person get another chance, and you're like, wait a second, I'm doing just as good as them or just as much or better, but they know somebody who knew somebody, or they're the son of the boss or something like that. So I think that when you invest a third-round pick in a player, it's a lot harder to pull the plug on that player versus a later-round guy. Another example of that is Nick Cross. Nick Cross is getting another chance to potentially start this year after starting just 4 games through his first 2 seasons, not looking all that great on the back end. How many lower-round guys, 7th-round draft picks, 6th-round draft picks, would get that opportunity to continue to play or get chance after chance if they hadn't produced yet? So I understand that in a vacuum, you probably don't want to make those decisions like that. But in reality, people have egos and thoughts about who they picked, and they don't want to be wrong.
Colts beat writer for The Athletic, James Boyd, is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. James, 2-part question for you. First end of it, you had observed earlier this week that Josh Downs, at least from a boot standpoint, was progressing nicely, yes?
Yes, he is out of the boot. He's off the scooter. That is obviously a good sign. We don't know what that means for his status for week 1, but I would imagine that means he's moving in the right direction.
Let's operate just for the sake of the conversation that he can't go week 1. He's close, but they decide to hold him out an extra week, so he ends up not making his season debut until week 2. How important does tonight become as once again a open audition or a situational audition, if you will, of A.D. Mitchell leading snaps in the slot as he has at times since Downs went down?
I think this could be a good opportunity for him because in that first game against the Broncos, I believe he had 1 catch. Obviously didn't play last week against the Cardinals. So this could be an opportunity for him to kind of show in an extended amount of run, hey, I am versatile enough to be in the slot. I can be that starting slot receiver, which they've kind of given him the title of throughout these joint practices and preseason practices. So we'll see, but also I don't know if it'll be just him in the slot. Like I said earlier, Anthony Gould, the rookie out of Oregon State, has really impressed as well. I think he could get some looks there as well. But this is a chance for 80. And then, to be honest, it's kind of if you want to look for a silver lining, it's kind of a blessing in disguise. You get 80 on the field early, and you never know if he shines and he starts balling out. Is there an opportunity for him to still, get out there and get some snaps with Josh Downs when he comes back? So I think Alec Pierce is feeling a little pressure right now. He's got to go out there and he's got to produce if he wants to keep his job.
Does the dynamic of having A.D. Mitchell in the slot for extended time do anything to complicate that perceived position value between Mitchell and Pierce, or is that two separate issues and they're not related?
I don't think that it'll, add too much to it. I do think that the more you can do as a receiver, obviously the more valuable you become. I'll give Alec Pierce a lot of credit. He looks a lot better this year on crossing routes and tweeners and things like that. And part of that is he has a quarterback back there that can get him the ball. But I think for AD, it's just a matter of, can I just make plays when I'm out there, whether it's in the slot, whether it's outside? Because, to be honest, outside, he's shown the ability, at least in one-on-one drills, to get open. I think what he was talking about to us last week was it's a little bit harder to read when you're playing in the slot because you have to play to the space more. You can't just beat your man. You kind of have to know where to go, sit down, settle in, and make a catch. So I'm excited to see him out there. I think they are too. And like I said, he's come along nicely in the last few weeks, and now it's just a matter of can he put it all together. But I don't think it'll affect too much of what he's doing with Alec Pierce on the outside.
James Boyd is our guest. He is with The Athletic. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Colts getting set for their final preseason game tonight in Cincinnati. James, give me 3 players for the Colts that you would assume might have had the most restless nights last night.
Ooh, restless nights last night. Obviously, Jelani Woods is one of them because they have to make a decision to.
It's hard to sleep with a hurt toe, right?
I mean, yeah, and it's also hard to sleep if you don't know if your job's, on the line. So
right, and that's obviously where I'm going with that, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think that he's one of them. Maybe another guy, kind of a dark horse candidate, would be like Trevor Denbo. I think that he's a guy, a relief safety. Do you keep him around? Do you take his spot and give it to Jelani Woods? He's someone who's probably thinking, dang, I didn't do anything wrong. I kind of did my job this preseason. And Shane Steichen actually mentioned him. We asked about the starting safety next to Julian Blackmon. So I'm like, hey, what the heck? Is this a possibility? So, and he's one. And then I would say running back as well, Tyler Goodson. Would he be the one to make the roster? Do they keep 4 running backs? And, or even a guy like Sam Ehlinger as well. They've kept 3 quarterbacks normally throughout the years. But, I mean, I've done my roster projections. I don't know if they keep 3 this year. And then that'll be the first time he doesn't make the team since he's been drafted. So that would be somebody who else you might get a little restless, last night.
What position would be the safest to play, not named tight end or safety for that matter, but the one that a player gets more flexibility because it's simply one that the Colts pattern shows that they like having depth in as many bodies as possible?
Defensive line. I think a guy like Taven Bryan, who hasn't had the best showing throughout preseason, probably still makes the team because they love to have 9 or 10 offensive linemen, and he's probably that 9th or 10th guy. So I think that he's somebody who definitely, benefits from the depth of his room. And then the same thing with the offensive line as well. I think that there is a couple of guys who, might have a chance to make the team just because the Colts like to have more bodies there than not. So we'll see what happens. But, I got my 53-man roster projection coming out later this evening right after the game ends. And so I'll be 100% right if you want to check that out.
Who do you have as the 50? Tell me this. Who's your 54th?
Ooh, can I reveal that? I would say Isaiah Land is probably my 54th guy.
So he might have
a good preseason.
Restless night, Jimmy.
It very well could be a restless night. James Boyd is our guest. Covers the Colts for The Athletic. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. James, looking at the defense, we've talked about areas of strength, areas of weakness. We know what they are, what they want to be up front, but it's been the secondary. It's been that biggest question. Are we at a point, and are the Colts at a point, where assuming tonight goes well, it's definitively Nick Cross and Julian Blackmon occupying both the safety spots, or is that very much still a fight for Blackmon's running mate?
I don't know. That is the question we've been asking Shane Steichen, And I kid you not, I asked it that exact same way. I believe that, others on the beat have as well. Jake Arthur from Sports Illustrated, Locked On Colts, he's asked the same thing. And every time we ask, Shane Steichen says, hey, we're still weighing our options. And the last time we asked the other day, he was like, hey, we got, a week and a half to decide who's going to start back there next to Julian Blackmon. And so they kind of refused to name Nick Cross an outright starter. And I don't know if that's like problematic, if that's ominous or what. But it sounds like they're open to playing Julian and then possibly figuring out if they even rotate a couple of guys next to him. I think they're going to move Julian around a lot this year. He's going to play some free and some strong, and they're going to try to hide whoever is next to him. But, it's kind of alarming that we got all the way through, preseason practice, all the way through training camp, and they still have not named a definitive starter when one of those guys who's competing for that spot is a former third-round pick.
James, what kind of camp did Matt Gonzalez have? Because, Braden Smith is a really good right tackle, and I think has been a probably underrated piece for Indianapolis, but durability has been questioned, and so they need some stability there. They went out and they drafted him. How's his preseason gone?
I think it's been pretty solid. I don't think that it's been something to, write home about just because that offensive line is pretty loaded in that room. He early on in camp was getting some deep reserve reps. He's got a few more backup reps recently. But I think that he's had a solid camp, and he's looked like the player they drafted. And he's another guy who dealt with a foot injury last year, fully healthy now, excited to be back. But I think he's a good pick. I don't, think that he's someone that you want to be starting right away. But if you do have to kind of turn to him, it could be a possibility because Blake Freeland, on the other hand, the second-year backup swing tackle, he's had a very rough preseason. And I don't know if you want to insert him if you really get, in a dicey situation.
James, you touched on this in the early goings of our conversation. James Boyd of The Athletic joins us. I know Shane Steichen's not going to give away too much of the goods in terms of what he shows on film tonight. That said, do you think we see any looks of the most hyped offensive package since Anthony Richardson was drafted, which is something with him and Jonathan Taylor on the run together?
I would like to see it. I would like to see a QB draw on the first play of the game, personally. But I say that in jest because I do want to see him react to running and possibly even getting hit. I'm not saying I want Anthony to go out there and be a crash test dummy, but I'm like, man, do you want that first hit to come now? Or do you want it to come during the season? I don't know, but I do think that we'll see a little bit of that.
Because that duo, you remember how hyped that was coming. It's like, oh man, you have the best running back in the league and maybe the most athletic quarterback in the league, and that's what you're having to face as a defense out of shotgun. So you probably don't think we see too much of those type of plays until the regular season, right?
Nah, I wouldn't bet on it. I probably, bet on some traditional handoffs and things like that and see if he can get a few yards.
Yeah.
If JT even plays, I know they said the starters would play.
Sure.
I would expect him to, but, historically he really hasn't. This is the first time.
Chap always has him in that camp.
That he plays.
Chap always has him in that camp of guys that you're good. You don't need to see him out there for a quarter and a half. He's fine.
Nah, you paid him all that money. Don't put him out there and, let him get hurt because you're trying to, I guess, be fair to everybody. Yeah, fair doesn't mean anything right now. Just make sure he stays healthy.
James Boyd. My mic there. Okay, James Boyd, is our guest. James, in terms of tonight, I mean, let's just get to the core here. Anthony Richardson, they're going to want to see what? I mean, is this just strictly look, we want to take the car out for a tune-up, or are they going to put in some things to continue to grow what they want to see out of him? And is there anything that we're going to see that we have not seen before? I know it sounds weird to say it that way, but schematically, if you get what I'm saying.
Nah, I think it's going to be very, very vanilla. We won't see anything, I don't think, too exotic, too sexy. We'll have to wait for the week 1 opener against Houston for that to be deployed. But again, I would just like to see Anthony in the offense. If I'm a Colts fan, if I'm the Colts front office, move the ball at least down the field, complete a few passes, show some comfortability back there. Because, I mean, that preseason opener, he only played 7 snaps, so he wasn't really able to get a rhythm. But tonight, assuming they do play the entire first quarter at least, he should have plenty of time to kind of catch his rhythm and get some things moving.
What, if anything, has he yet to show in this preseason that you would like to have seen so far?
I don't don't really know. I think I'll take this question. I think you mean like throughout the preseason as far as training camp practices and all
Correct.
that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Well, in that case, I think I would like to see him process maybe a little bit quicker on his reads, because I think sometimes when Anthony gets himself in trouble, he's just not getting the ball out of his hands quick enough. Not saying he's holding on to it for an eternity, but there's a couple of plays where I'm like, if you're just a tick faster, a tick quicker to that check down, for example, you'll be able to keep the ball moving, because sometimes we know what he can do down the field, the explosive plays, but obviously those plays aren't going to always be there. So you have to get the ball out of your hands. Sometimes let your, pass catcher do the work for you, pick up a first down, things like that. So a little bit quicker processing, not holding on to the ball. And for everyone out there listening, you can be relieved that he is getting down and sliding when he's running. So that's a good thing to see.
James, we didn't see any of Flacco last week. We didn't really see anybody outside of Ellinger and other quarterbacks on the depth chart. But no one wants to see Flacco, right? If we see Flacco, it winds up meaning that bad things happen to Anthony Richardson if this is week 4. I get that. But in terms of where you categorize him, do you think he's closer to the Jonathan Taylor mold of he's been around the league enough, we don't need to see any reps from him, it's good? Or do you think once they get into the second unit of things when when Richardson's done, that we see Flacco tonight?
Yeah, I think you should see Flacco tonight, because they essentially treated him like a starter the previous week, last week, where he didn't go in there, and obviously we saw all the reserves get out there, and he was the one that was kind of not in there. So I think you should get some reps tonight as well. Obviously, you don't want to see him get any real reps throughout the season. So I'd almost be joking with him like, hey, man, this is the first and last game you're playing, for us, as far as a quarter goes. And maybe he'll get a kick out of that. So we'll see. And it is good to see him out there, because I do think that beyond what it means for Flacco, some of those twos who are still going to be in the rotation come the regular season get a lot of great balls thrown to them, because Joe Flacco is one of the better backups in the league.
James, give me the roadmap for the Colts between now and by that I mean the timeline here in terms of, I know that you said you've got your 53-man roster you'll have out, but for the Colts, they need to do that when, and we will begin to see that process when?
So I believe the official cut-down date is next Tuesday. It's in the afternoon, and so we will find out then who's made or missed the cut. So they'll have some time, a little bit more time than perhaps other teams playing this weekend, to decide who's going to make their final roster. Are
you going to go to the hat store, by the way? Are you a hat guy?
I am not a big hat guy. I don't know if I have time to make it to the hat store, but I do want to say, Jake, you have lived an incredible life, because every time I talk to you, you've done something, and I'm like, well, how and why and where were you there? And you just have these random things that you've done in your life, which is awesome.
Well, I appreciate that. Part of that, James, you know what that means? Jake, you're old.
It means you're eclectic.
I'll take eclectic. How about this? I'm old and eclectic. How's that?
There you go.
I've learned this, James. Here's my lesson for you, and I don't mean this about the hat store, so you get a pass on this one, right? But what I've learned is this. When you're driving somewhere or you are on a trip or whatever it may be, and you see something on the map that's of intrigue for you, and you say to yourself, you know what? It's an hour out of my way. You may never be in that spot again, so an hour out of your way actually can save you years later in life. So you just go ahead and go with it. Finish the hour.
That's a good way to live.
Take the hour. You may never get there again, man. If it's within sight, you got to go after it. That's the bottom line. So there you go.
Good.
I should have listened to that advice on the ketchup chip run.
Having said that, James, during the Colts travels that you will do this year, if you'd like a rundown of any spots where serial killers might have lived or struck in the cities you're visiting, you let me know, and I can send you to all of them.
No, I kind of like hanging out with the living, so I don't know about that.
All right, James, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you. And by the way, my understanding is, because I've got to go to this weekend. So this weekend I'm going to Portland for IndyCar. I come back on a red eye at like 5 in the morning, and you capably will be filling in on Monday, I think the first 2 days of the week, so that I can get some R&R and get ready for the regular season. So it is much appreciated. I don't know if they've told you that or not, but that's the game plan.
Yep, I'll be there Monday and Tuesday filling in for you. You make sure you have a great time and get some rest, my friend.
All right, definitely will do that. Appreciate it, James Boyd. And part of the reason why, when I'm in Portland, for example, now, Jimmy, you're off the list.
I know I am.
Eddie, I can help out with this, but when we're in Portland, we get a chance to go to the employee outlets for Nike and Columbia outerwear.
Yep.
So, sorry.
Hey, I have to
Corbin,
pay
you want anything?
I have to pay a penance. I respect it. I understand.
How did you not? I mean, you're 15 minutes from the ketchup chips.
I know.
If I had not found them at one of the grocery stores here locally, and they're a different brand, they're not the true Canadian ketchup chips. If I had not found them, would you have gone with it, or did you feel like you had some sort of a leeway there?
It wasn't a leeway thing. I think it was more of it was my bros trip with my friend Nick. We're just going for the Yankees. He was driving. I wasn't trying to send him 15 minutes that way across the border.
Have you ever thought about now? Tell me about this Nick.
Sure.
Nice guy.
Very nice guy.
You met him when?
Since preschool.
Yeah, you've known him your whole life.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So your agenda is his agenda. When you guys were on the road trip, did you stop anywhere on the way up and get snacks?
We made a McDonald's stop, yeah.
Okay. Chuck, I had a double burger. Is that what you? Okay, so he probably would have enjoyed the ketchup chips, right?
Probably.
Okay. Could have helped out two guys here.
I know.
Helped out your boy?
Hey, if it's Eddie, and I know it's not, I'm not trying to get back on the list. I'm just telling you where the guilt has been. If it wasn't $35 on Amazon to ship ketchup chips, the authentic ketchup chips, if it wasn't $35, I would have done it. I would have done it right to pay for my sins.
I know. Well, I just got an offer from Roots Canada. They've now got a thing for the holidays where you can custom make and they have the best sweatshirts ever. You can custom make them, but it says you have to pick up in store. I might drive to Windsor just to do that, and then I can get the chips, and guess who won't be getting a bag?
This guy.
Thursday, a Colts Game Day Thursday. Thanks for tuning in. We hope to get some satisfaction tonight out of the play of Anthony Richardson, although he will again be going against the second unit of the Cincinnati Bengals. Thanks to James Boyd for joining us. We'll get the Cincinnati side of things coming up top of the hour. Ben Baby from ESPN Cincinnati will join the program. Jimmy, if you recall, I made the pilgrimage down to Nashville, Tennessee, in order to go to see Hootie and the Blowfish. What was that, 2 weeks ago, something like that?
Yeah.
Stopped at Buc-ee's on the way down. That was a big talking point, of course. Corbin, you don't happen to have the breaking news sounder handy by any chance, do you? Corbin's filling in for Eddie. I realize Eddie sometimes hides things behind lock and key, and then it becomes
well, he has to make it that he is irreplaceable.
That's exactly right.
If he made it too easy, then you'd think anybody could do it.
So, there we go. Thank you, Corbin. This from our friends at WTHR. Starting on March the 6th, Southwest Airlines will now offer nonstop flights from Indianapolis to Nashville.
How about that?
Now, it's only a 4-hour drive, but I guess you could also fly to Chicago, right? But
yeah.
Would you fly to Nashville?
I think it's still in that area of that's a nice road trip. I'll go drive it.
Here's the thing with that, and I'm in agreement with you. Now, if you're using it as a connection, or if Nashville, for example, if you're going to go to, give me an international city you've always wanted to go but have never been to.
Dublin.
So, well, thank you. It'll be happy to have you, lad. So I'm doing that in October. I'm going to London or to Dublin. I understand if you can save significant money by flying, let's say, from Nashville or Chicago, like, you maybe even drive to one of those two cities and leave your car and take off, whatever.
Sure.
But Nashville's in that gray area of I think from here to Nashville is basically 4.5 hours, right?
Yeah. Last made that drive 2 years ago for a little 4th of July weekend. So, yeah, about 4.5.
Okay. Now, let's just say for the sake of argument that you have a 1 p.m. flight to Nashville.
Okay.
You would want to get to the airport around what time?
If my wife's with me, 7 a.m. If it's just me, probably 11:30.
Okay, 11:30, fair. So you leave your house to go to the airport at what time? 10:45?
Yeah.
To park and everything else?
Yeah.
So you leave at 10:45 to get to the airport. You take off at 1. What kind of a flight do you think we're talking here? A 55-minute flight?
Yeah, that's probably.
Okay, so you land at 1:55.
Maybe an hour.
By the time you get off the plane and everything else, and then you're going to need a rental car, right?
Sure.
So it's 2:15. You get in the rental car.
Though Nashville would fit in the bill of an Uber city.
Okay, Uber's fine.
Ubering.
So you get out, and by the time you get in the Uber, it's 2:10, and then the Uber is, let's say, 20 minutes to Broadway, 25 minutes to Broadway. Okay. You get to Broadway at 2:35. You are now getting to Broadway from your house 3 hours and 50 minutes after you left your house. So it's kind of 6 to 1, half dozen the other, is it not?
Yeah.
But it is if you're going to go, I get it. If you want to, I don't know, it'd be kind of fun to do if it's an inexpensive trip, but it seems like.
Well, that's the problem, is that with how expensive flights can be, you're still
Correct.
Better off with the savings of just having to fill up twice on that trip than you are having
For example, there is no more boring drive than from here to Des Moines, but every time that I intentionally
Is that another one? Is that like Brooklyn?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
My buddies and I, when the first time that I ever went to Des Moines, Iowa, I was on a road trip with 2 buddies. We stopped at a Wendy's in Des Moines and intentionally started asking everybody, how long have you lived in Des Moines? And we did it just to see how long it would be before someone said, it's Des Moines, right?
Would you get to 2?
No, no one.
No one said anything?
People just felt sorry. We're like, yeah, this is a neat town. Do you like living in Des Moines? That's fine. Yeah, da-da-da.
Because when was this?
We are from 1997.
Okay, I was going to say, you do that today?
We're from Indianapolis, and, it feels kind of like just a slightly bigger Des Moines. Well, yeah, it's nice, da-da-da. Now, was there any thought of calling it the Des Moines Cubs? And no one corrected us. So I've always just gone with Des Moines. But if you were to fly there, you can't go direct. So by the time you go through Chicago or like Nashville or whatever, and then you get there, it's a 5.5 hour to 6 hour later. It's the same difference and then half the price. Anyway, was going to ask you this question. Give me a TV show, or because we're at the point in the NFL preseason where it kind of feels like the same rerun over and over and over, right? I mean, I get the fact, and I understand and respect the fact that the tight end situation, Anthony Richardson, kind of the same plot lines going over and over. So I have a two-part question for you about rerun television shows, and we can go streaming or you can go regular show. Two-part question. The first is, give me a show that everybody else loved that is a major part of the American culture, either past or present, that for whatever reason, you've never seen it. Like, I don't know, I never got into it. Never watched it, didn't download it, didn't watch it, never got into it. And then also give me a show that in its current and its live run, you never got into it, but you watch it now and you're like, yeah, it's decent.
Okay, so the first one, and this is very bad. Like, people are going to come at me because I'm ashamed of it, but it is what it is. Only watched one episode of Breaking Bad.
Okay. I can't say anything to you because I've never seen The Sopranos.
Okay.
So
that would be
Corbin,
the one.
did you see Breaking Bad?
Like the first season of it.
Okay.
To be clear, like in general, that entire cast is amazing, and I'm ashamed of that aspect. But that would be the one. What was the second TV show you wanted? That was one that everybody's seen.
The second one is one that you catch on rerun now or in syndication, and you didn't watch it at the time that it was a thing, and you're like, yeah, it's fine, it's good, but how did I not see this the first go round? Or for that matter, a streaming show that you watched well after the fact. I watched Breaking Bad like 2 years ago, which was 5 years after, or 10 years or whatever after it was relevant. Same with The Wire. The Wire is the greatest TV show ever made. Breaking Bad is excellent, but I thought personally, and I appear to be on my own island on this, okay? I appear to be on my own island in the fact that I thought the final season of Breaking Bad, it went too long.
Okay.
I just was like, okay. Like, it just kind of got to the point where you're like, I get it. Let's go here. Let's wrap this up. And I apparently am alone on an island with that. But it was a good show. One of the hard things about binge watching shows that were once, if you binge watch a television show that in its initial run was an actual over-the-air television show, the hard part of that is, like, The Wire and Breaking Bad both fall into this category. The Wire was on HBO. I think it was on Sunday nights. Breaking Bad was on, AMC maybe?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And those shows, the episodes that you're watching were designed under the assumption that someone had not been watching it for a week because it was, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So when you binge watch it, sometimes it feels, you're like, yeah, I mean, this is really redundant because you're watching it one next back to back to back,
right.
And they were designed to be with kind of to refresh people's memories from the week before, and so it can feel kind of redundant. But I'll give you one for me. I never watched The Office. I don't have anything against it. I just never. I don't know. I was doing whatever with my life at that time, and I've never watched it. I see the clips of it, but I've never watched it. I never watched The Sopranos. A show that I see now because it's on after Seinfeld on one of the cable channels at night. I will watch an episode here and there of King of Queens, which I never watched in its initial run, and it's a good show. What's fascinating to me when I watch shows like that, and they're from like 2005, 2008, something, is I think to myself, what was I doing when this was, at the moment this was running on live television? I would have been 32 years old. What was I doing? Where was I? Who was I? It kind of takes me back to wondering where I was at that point, what I was doing. What show are you currently watching?
Currently in the Rolodex, it's recorded episodes because they're not live and new right now, would be Family Guy. Like, that's still an active show that's going on, though. But, like, that's one that I'll throw on, and I know it's going to make me laugh a couple of times, but it's not something that requires, like, a binge-watch commitment to it.
Corbin, you watching anything currently? Binging it?
Yeah, How I Met Your Mother.
That's a popular one, right?
That's a generational thing, but that's my all-time favorite sitcom. And I realize Seinfeld or Friends will beat it out for the vast majority of the American public, but
Speaking of that, I find this odd. Again, I go back to my story about Jalen Rose, where you don't know someone's background until you get to know them a little bit. So I understand that, and I'm aware of it. But for people that I am friends with or know that I am aware grew up in a healthy, stable familial setting growing up, I've had a few of them, people that I grew up with, that I know both their parents. They were, a at least from the outside, a fairly, healthy environment. And I've said to them, so how did your parents meet? I have no idea. What? Like, how do you not know how your parents met? Doesn't it come up at some point in conversation?
You would think.
At some point, doesn't like your dad just say to you, like, that reminds me of the time when your mother and I okay. It just seems like something most people would ask at some point over a half century of life, if you're my age, don't you just out of curiosity alone go, hey, how did you meet Mom? I don't know. Maybe I'm just sometimes, Jimmy, it's difficult for me. The life that I lead, this brain, being a naturally curious person sometimes can be very rewarding, and other times it can be unbelievably torturous.
Not all heroes wear capes, Jake.
Just so you know. Yep. It can be unbelievably torturous. Yep. All right, we'll get back to talking about sports again. Ben Baby going to join us coming up at 2 o'clock. On the other side, I'll tell you about something we're going to do in this program that's going to make you the smartest guy or gal in the room. sir. Very good memory. Jimmy, yesterday we gave out all of the spots for our fantasy football league, correct? This is the employee-owned and operated fantasy football league, right?
We did hand all those out. By the way, though, if you were one of the lucky recipients of a spot that you earned, not everybody's joined the league yet. There's still time. We haven't had the draft yet, but make sure you accept that invitation that Eddie sent you to join the league. But yes, we have all our spots filled.
How are we going to do the draft when everybody has the time to do it is the question.
Again, I don't mean to pass the buck here, but I defer all that to Eddie. I think he's taking this.
That sounds like a good idea.
He's taking this thing by storm.
Right. That sounds good, yeah. Mr. Columbus, how exactly did you end up in the Indies? Well, I handed the navigation over to Eddie, and the next thing I knew, we're on these islands, and, Pieros Indios, there's the people.
A lot of people don't know this. We give Eddie a hard time about the size of his head all the time. Big brain there. He's ready to lead the charge.
Well, we're going to find that out. So here's the thing. I have to be kind to Eddie because I know that his parents occasionally listen to the program, but I know that today there's no way they are because he's not here, and why else would you listen to the show?
But he is listening to the show because he's already texted me once about stuff we've talked about on the show. So
okay. Glad to see he can step away.
Exactly.
Step outside the box. So fantasy football to me is an interesting thing. I think fantasy football has gone a long way in catapulting the popularity of the NFL. And I have mentioned before on numerous occasions that, and I found it interesting, one of the really, truly interesting conversations that we've had, Jimmy, and I can't remember if we had it on or off air, but we had a discussion, I wouldn't say debate, but a discussion about what we consider to be the peak years of fantasy football. And you were saying, oh, it's right now. And I was saying, no, I think it's more like 15 years ago. But what's interesting is 15 years ago is when I was in your age demographic.
Sure.
Right? So you almost wonder if it's an age demographic thing. I think the NFL, when it went from being the 799-pound gorilla to the 800-pound gorilla, fantasy football in the incorporation of, and I don't mean this misogynistically, but the incorporation of, I will use the term women, but demographic that were vicarious or tag-along NFL fans. And now all of a sudden, because their significant other or their coworker or whatever was really into the NFL, they had a reason to get involved. And I think there were a lot of women that eye-rolled football until their husband said, well, fine. If you think you think it's not hard, here, I'll put you in my fantasy league and we'll see how you do. And then the women end up doing well. And then it's like, well, I'm just – and then
right.
So that then they start watching, paying attention. Now you've got a new demographic. But the one thing about fantasy football that I've always felt, and this is a public service announcement for anybody out there, no one cares about your fantasy team.
Correct.
I mean, that's a blanket statement. But however, most people do care about their own fantasy team, and they are curious in terms of what do we do in, this weekend. Man, I'm really torn. I've got, my wide receiver that do I go with this guy or that guy, whatever else. So in terms of people that are getting ready for a fantasy football draft, you want to make sure that you have that. I remember the first year that I did fantasy football, the very first year that I did it. It was back in the day. I was working at the cigar store, and Gunner from another radio station here in town, Q95, Gunner he and his group of buddies would come into the cigar store, so he invited me into his fantasy football league, and it was like dial-up internet days, and we're talking so old school that each Monday Gunner would show up at the cigar store with a printout of the results because we couldn't get on the internet just yet fast enough to be able to do all of that. And I remember I drafted Steve McNair in like the 4th round, and then Cecil Collins, Cecil the Diesel, who was really good until he broke into a woman's house and got arrested and then never was heard from again. But I drafted both those guys to shelf them because we were in a keeper league, right?
Sure.
And I was going to be the genius that was going to outsmart everybody else. Adrian Morrell was really good for me that year, by the way, if that tells you how long ago it was. We got a guy coming up, Jeff Ratcliffe. It's going to join us at the bottom of the 2 o'clock hour, and he is going to make you a genius by telling you what players to avoid, what players to draft, that conversation coming up at 2:30 because you want to hear it because we're not talking about other people's fantasy team, but rather tips on how you can help yours. Okay? Doing that at 2:30. We have tickets to give away, Corbin, for OAR. Is that correct? We have one pair of tickets to give away. Do we know when the OAR tickets, when the concert is? Do we have the information?
I don't.
Okay. You don't happen to have the information, do you there, Jimmy?
This is what I'm talking about with Eddie Spring Brain. You know, we need him. We need him in the saddle.
August 31st.
There it is.
Thank you. August 31st out at White River, the lawn at White River, Everwise Amphitheater at White River State Park. The tickets are for August 31st. We have a pair to give away. We will do it. Do caller number what, Corbin?
Let's go 5 for Anthony Richardson.
Caller number 5 for Anthony Richardson, 239-1070. You are on your way to see OAR. And Ben Baby of Cincinnati joins us next. Every so often, when you are watching television coverage of a big event, you see a reporter who all of a sudden is thrust into or catapulted into covering a storyline or out of the element of the norm for them, which is usually a true testament to one's professionalism and skill set. I thought that was absolutely the case for our next guest, who joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. He covers the Cincinnati Bengals for ESPN. To use it in an analogous term, he is basically the Stephen Holder of Cincinnati. And Ben Baby, a couple of years ago, in that capacity, found himself having to be the one that was covering the overnight watch of the Damar Hamlin situation. And as I was watching it, I thought, boy, here's a guy that went thinking he was just going to cover an NFL game, and now all of a sudden he's working like 22 hours a night, standing in front of a hospital doing live shots. And it speaks to one's professionalism and versatility. I thought it was very impressive. He joins us now on the show to talk about tonight's game between the Colts and the Bengals on a much more lighthearted topic. Ben, first, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing well. First off, I can't thank you enough. That is incredibly kind of you to say that. I think that, as I've said many times, I think you go cover whatever it is that's going to happen when you go cover a game. Unfortunately, that's kind of what happened with Damar that night, and thankfully he was not only able to make a full recovery, but for him to play in the league again, I think that enough people, it's still hard for me to wrap my mind around given what happened that night. And also incredibly kind of you to compare me to Stephen Holder. I'm just trying to do my best Holder impersonation because he is the man. He does a great job. Well, if I can be an ounce of what he is, I'm good.
That means you get to go to Pacers games now with Jake, so you better clear your schedule.
That's right. Steven's my regular Pacers seatmate. That is true. All right, Ben, let's begin with this because I want to give the Colts fans that are listening to this show kind of a perspective or a barometer on what we are going to measure against with Indianapolis. So for Cincinnati, they are taking this game at what level from their starter standpoint of how much they're going to push in?
Yeah, if I'm going to put it from a scale of 1 to 10, I'm going to put it about a 2.5 because we're not expecting to see any starters. We might get a couple here and there who maybe are competing for starting jobs. Maybe you get the cornerbacks out there who are the ones or potential ones. But aside from that, the Bengals aren't going to play a lot of starters. And historically, that's something they haven't done. This year was kind of the exception. They were played in that first game of the preseason and then haven't been on the field since. So, this will be if you're the Colts, you're going to get your starters a chance to maybe knock off some rust or stay as sharp as you can going into week one. But the Bengals, they will not be playing the bulk of their starters tonight. It'll be a lot of the backups, much like we saw in the Chicago game.
Okay, you mentioned for example, and I'll put it to you this way, Ben, we are obviously here in Indianapolis very curious to see, and will be for quite some time, what exactly and who exactly Anthony Richardson is. So I thought it would be good to have somebody on that can give us a perspective in terms of the Bengals on areas where if you know the Bengals defense and you know their second string in particular of what they should look like. So the areas that Anthony Richardson should be able to look good tonight and exploit is what?
I mean, he should be able to, if they're able to pass downfield, I think that's going to be huge. And honestly, if I'm the Bengals, I want that. I want Anthony Richardson going out there and testing our cornerbacks. And so that way they can get a really good evaluation. It's funny, in the locker room after the joint practice, everybody was complaining that that there was so much running going on and that Anthony Richardson, even Joe Flacco, decided to do a lot of scrambling and they wanted him to throw the ball a little bit. Now, linebacker Jermaine Pratt told me that they still got good work in, which was fine, but they wanted to see the ball get thrown around a little bit. So I think that for both teams, ideally, you're having Anthony Richardson go out and see what he can get, in the passing game. And if you're the Bengals, you want to see if you can defend, then defend that. And if you're a Colts fan, if you're the Colts, you want to see how well he's able to go out and attack. And we saw in the joint practice that he didn't throw the ball a ton, but when they went into the 2-minute drill, I thought they moved the ball effectively. In fact, they did much better than the Bengals ones, who got sacked twice and had an incompletion, and that was about it. So, I thought that the Colts ones offensively were much more impressive than the Bengals ones offensively in that 2-minute drill and in the red zone as well. If I'm watching the Bengals offense, they couldn't get anything going on that on the Colts defense late in that joint practice. But I think seeing what they can get in the passing game will be the thing to watch.
Okay, and then give me an area, Ben, that you would anticipate, like going into it. Let's say, for example, that you would never do this, I realize. I mean, I'm being totally serious. But let's say that there's somebody that says, I'm going to write kind of just a boilerplate column on this game tonight based on what surely is going to happen, and then I'll make the proper amendments. Somebody that would do that going into it would assume that Cincinnati is going to be really good in what area?
That's a good question, to be honest. I think that I want to see what this defense continues to look like. Against, it's so hard when you're getting ones versus twos. And I'll be honest, I've been really impressed with what Indianapolis has done or did last season. I think Shane Steichen did a phenomenal job. Really curious to see how this group continues to develop under him. And so you're expecting the Colts ones to come out, and they should be able to play pretty solid, especially if they go a quarter and change, which I've seen that could be a possibility in this game. So if you're the Bengals, you want your backups, your defensive line. You want to see what that depth looks like. You want to see what your depth at offensive tackle looks like. Are they able to withstand the pressure? Are they able to get pressure from the interior? And then, I think the cornerbacks in the depth in the secondary, I think has been underrated. I really like what Josh Newton has done, and it looks like, he had an up and down game against Chicago, started out really well, and then kind of got picked on throughout the course of that game. And I think that took him out of any outside shot he had of being the starter, despite being a fifth-round pick this year. But he's a guy who has looked pretty good. And if you're the Bengals, these are going to be great reps for him, seeing what Jordan Battle can do in an extended look, Tyson Anderson, as he comes off of injury as well. So that secondary is going to be really, really intriguing. And the guy that I think a lot of folks are really curious to watch, a guy by the name of Muma Jongmeta, a linebacker undrafted out of Wisconsin, has 17 tackles in 2 preseason games, and a guy that a lot of people thought would not be even a thought for consideration on the 53, and I think a lot of us are penciling him in there. So, I think the defense should be able to hold up well enough, and I think that even if the ones aren't on the field, I think we should get some good reps and some good looks in this game for both sides.
ESPN's Ben Baby is our guest. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Ben, I want to zoom off the field for just a second. It's been documented, the Ja'Marr Chase hold-in situation, and we had a similar conversation, Jake and I did, last year around this time regarding the running back pay scale issues, teams wanting to go cheap there, and how far away we were from wide receivers being that next position where they get cut by the margins. And you're kind of already seeing it right now. The Chiefs trade away Tyreek Hill to save money on their budget. You've seen teams kind of balk at the idea of paying top dollar. Now, Chase is still under contract for 2 more seasons, but if this hold-in continues into the regular season, what is to be gained for him? Is he fighting for, his own long-term security? Is he fighting for wide receivers being worried about, hey, they don't really want to pay the premium guys anymore? What is the main goal of what Ja'Marr Chase is fighting for?
Yeah, I think, in talking to Ja'Marr, even going back before he was even remotely eligible for a new contract, I think he has been very much talking about getting a new deal for going on well over a year now. And he knows that what the numbers are like at the top of the market, and he has expressed that's where he wants to be paid. And I think one of the outstanding factors in this is that CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk also do not have their deals done. And so if you're Ja'Marr Chase and you get a deal done now, let's say it does top Justin Jefferson by a smidge. Well, what happens when that deal gets signed and then all of a sudden CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Ayuk sign deals that are bigger than that? And if you're someone who wants to be paid top of the market and are no longer, and you get to hold that title for only a split second, I mean, that's got to be really frustrating. And I think that's part of the, that's something that we don't know a ton about, because both sides have been they've really been ironclad throughout the course of negotiations. Even Ja'Marr, who was our Media Cooperation Award winner last year for how much he spoke to the media and at what length, he has not said a thing. Going back to when he reported for mandatory minicamp and he missed all of the voluntary workouts. And I told him, I said, listen, if you want to talk, let me know. If not, we're going to be here. And he said, that's fine. As long as it doesn't come out of my mouth, we're good. And so I said, okay. And so that told me everything I needed to know. And I think with Ja'Marr and this whole receiver situation, what you all said is very interesting, because, I think that some teams, when you look at it, and we've looked at this a ton at ESPN, it's actually something we're working on. There doesn't seem to be like with the running back market, teams are generally on the same page. They understand what running backs bring to the table, how much what their value is, both on the field and what they mean in salary cap wise and how they affect the winning and losing of a game and what the replacement level provides. Now, receivers, because it is, not to get too into the weeds here, but, when you look at the advanced analytics on what receivers bring to the table, there is a large variance compared to other players on the field in the way that teams throw the ball. Receivers are very valuable. I think one of the things that teams are now doing the calculations at, and you look at the prices for some of these top-end receivers, there are so many good receivers coming into the league, and now we're seeing as college programs, especially in the SEC, really start to shift to more pass-friendly offenses like we've seen over the last 5-6 years, that should change the type of receivers that come in to the NFL. And so I think it's a really interesting conversation. I think it's something that we'll continue to develop and kind of talk about even further over the next few years, because I don't think there's a consensus, and that's what makes this such a fascinating situation, not only in Cincinnati, but around the league.
You bring up the CeeDee Lamb and Brendan Ayuk complication of, like you brought up in that hypothetical, Chase signs today and he immediately gets topped by Lamb and Ayuk. Maybe he, has regret in that regard. Conversely, do the Bengals feel pressure to get that deal done before the Ayuk and Lamb deals happen because perhaps their number jumps up larger from Chase's side of the ledger?
I've not got that sense.
Okay.
And the Bengals are one to make sure that they do things in their time frame. They do not like to be bullied into something else. The only time I've seen players really get their way is they get traded out after they just throw an absolute fit. Carlos Dunlap in 2020 was going on Instagram Live and basically complaining about his spot on the depth chart, tweeting out depth chart photos, made it almost untenable. That's the only situation I've seen where the Bengals had their hand forced. Otherwise, it just doesn't happen. They're very ironclad in that. And to be fair, I do think the Bengals have made it they've said publicly and also expressed this privately that they would like to get something done with Jamar. That is not, they know how valuable he is. They understand what he means, not only to the franchise, but also to Joe Burrow's success as well and how instrumental he's been for both of those things. And so that has not been, lost on anybody. But, the Bengals, team president Mike Brown said at the beginning of camp, even before camp started, that it was unlikely that a deal gets done and that the die has probably already been cast. So, they had kind of come to terms like it might not happen this year. We've got him under contract this year. We got him on his 5th-year option. And so, it may be that the only leverage Jamar has is to miss a couple game checks and say, hey, this is what – and again, there's no indication yet that he's willing to take this into the regular season. I think that's something that he's going to have to answer and the team is going to have to answer as we get closer. But it does make sense that if he doesn't play in the first 2 games, he's then going to be able to say, this is how much I'm actually worth. This is why I'm asking for this much. And so, does it get to that point? I think that's the thing that everybody really wants to know.
Even with a second unit that's going to be going tonight, and maybe at the receiver position for this reason, there's some reason for guys to try to really show out tonight. But Indianapolis defensively will be tested how?
I think that, Jermaine Burton has been a really fascinating guy, a 3rd-round pick out of Alabama, a guy that a lot of people thought was really talented, but there were some character issues, played at Georgia and Alabama. We've seen him have some flashes here over these first 2 games. Can he continue that progress in the 3rd game? The Bengals, quite frankly, need a much better showing than they had offensively. Whether it was a preseason game or not, I don't think I've seen Zach Taylor, the Bengals head coach, more disgusted after any game, given how many penalties they had and the fact that their second-team offense could not pick up a corner blitz on every second down that the Bears showed. So there was a lot of frustration in how that group looked, how the lack of the dullness, I should say, across the board. And so I think that offense will need to come out and play much better. If they play like they did in Chicago, there's going to be nothing for the Colts to worry about. They should look phenomenal. But I think that Jermaine Burton will be a guy to watch, and we'll see, how much, we see from Andre Yoshevas, Charlie Jones. I think that receiving core, guys who are going to be battling, Trent Irwin, battling for that wide receiver 3 spot, some more reps at that position, seeing how many targets and snaps they get. That's going to be, offensively what I'm looking for from Cincinnati.
You referenced Charlie Jones there. Ben Baby is our guest, covers the Bengals for ESPN.com, and he joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Utilized as a returner at times last year, special teams guy, but had appeared to have a relatively solid training camp, and there's a local tie-in there because he did spend a year at Purdue. What have you seen from Charlie Jones throughout, and what do you expect from him in year 2 in a Bengals uniform?
Yeah, he's escaped a really serious injury when he banged knees earlier in camp, and it looked like he was getting carted off, and it looks like it could have been something serious. And then he went in the locker room, and everybody was cheering because it wasn't going to be that bad, which was good. We'll see how much action he gets tonight. He did not participate against Chicago. Talking to Charlie after last season, he told me that he made it a point to improve every aspect of his game and really wanted to show that he deserves more snaps, deserves more reps, and can be more than a punt returner, which he did a good job of last year. I believe he took one to the house. And so, I think that he's a guy who has flashed and Burrow has built some trust in. And can he do enough to get more snaps, get more reps with this offense is going to be something to watch. And so I think that's why, Charlie is among that group of receivers. And he's a guy that wants to show that he's capable of producing more and capable of being trusted with more.
Ben Baby is our guest. He's on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. You can read his work at ESPN.com covering the Cincinnati Bengals. Ben, you've been with the Bengals on the beat during this rise, right? And what's impressive to me about the Bengals is when they really burst onto the scene and just kind of almost like overnight with this Super Bowl team with Joe Burrow and, all the weapons, sustaining that is, we've seen this in Indianapolis, sustaining that is the hard part because, number one, you got to get guys to continue to have drive now that they've been there. And then number two, your roster starts getting plucked a little bit. And all of a sudden, a third-string player on a Super Bowl team is more desired than sometimes even a backup on a middle-tier team with free agency and et cetera. What's been the biggest challenge for the Bengals to keep at this? And I ask that only to say if the Colts have a breakthrough year this year, what becomes the challenge to stay there?
I think the Bengals did a really good job of going out and addressing their defense in 2021 before then and really hitting free agency hard. It was a big criticism of the franchise prior to Joe Burrow coming here, and that they just did not spend a lot of money on external free agents, and they did a really good job of finding certain guys and really hitting on them. They have value deals in Chidobe Awuzie, who's now with the Titans, Trey Hendrickson, defensive end, who's been one of the best edge rushers in the league. Two guys that come to mind, Von Bell, who was so important that when he left for a year, the whole secondary just looked awful, and they brought him back, and immediately things looked better. So they've done a really good job in that way, and that's important. And then it's also just making sure you build around the quarterback, and it's something that I don't have to explain to folks in Indianapolis, given all the comparisons that the Joe Burrow got to Andrew Luck over the years. And I think for here, that's the biggest thing, aside from making sure that you continue to draft well and scout well, is you've got to make sure that the quarterback is in good shape, not only surrounded with a lot of good players, but he's also physically in good condition. I think that's something we're going to continue to monitor, because I think that at the beginning of camp, Burrow did look a lot better than he did at the end of the offseason program. And as camp has went on, it's been, I think it's been a little hit or miss. He's had some ups and downs. I haven't really seen him push the ball downfield in a few practices, so we'll see how he looks during week one. And he's told me that the wrist feels great. Actually, that's what he's told me about how he feels now. So that's really something to monitor. But, I think that it's interesting that, the Bengals are playing the Colts, because I've actually had a league source tell me I had some criticisms of the Colts and how much they did not attack free agency and getting external players. I think that's something that people are taking note of around the league, and it's something that someone brought up to me, and that roster, they're surprised that there weren't more additions made. So maybe that is something to look at moving forward, is where... You mean because they felt they were closer because they were way off and they needed to upgrade? That's just a little bit of the latter, that they needed to make some upgrades. Right. The team on paper maybe wasn't as good as maybe they valued internally. And so I think that was a conversation that somebody, league source had with me this offseason. So he just brought it up randomly. He just goes, I just don't really understand why the Colts don't go and haven't made a bigger push for external free agents. And maybe they did. It didn't get who they were looking for, and decided to reassess that plan. But I think that was something that was notable, and something that you have to do in order to compete, because the Bengals, they know that very well, that, there's always, you have to be able to make sure that roster is good enough, because especially in this AFC, like the competition is so fierce to be the representative in the Super Bowl. Ben, you're native to Grapevine, Texas, correct? That is absolutely correct. Basically suburban. That's the DFW. It's more Fort Worth than Dallas, if I'm not mistaken. But what high school in Grapevine, if you don't mind me asking? No, I went to actually Colleyville Heritage. We're zoned really weird. I did not live in Colleyville, but that's how the zones were drawn. Bobby Witt Jr., who's having a great season for the the Kansas City Royals. He's an alma mater from there. Max Crosby also doing things with the Raiders as well. So.
You were on it because this is what we do. I look up the most famous alumni from people's high schools. Now, unfortunately, Grapevine High School's got Post Malone and a bunch of other people.
Correct.
Okay, you got Bobby Witt. You got Adam Zimmer. That's cool. A lot of sports. Matter of fact, everybody famous listed on there, and I'm a little offended, no offense, that you're not listed in the notable alumni Wikipedia page. You ought to get on there and edit that. You mentioned Max Crosby, right? That's a good one. Christian Ponder, also from there, right?
Actually, so fun fact. So my first story ever that I wrote for anybody was about Christian Ponder. So when I was a freshman, or I believe I was a sophomore. I think it was a freshman actually. I was on our high school newspaper, and Christian Ponder had just gotten to Florida State. He believed it was a redshirt year. So actually, this was in my sophomore year of high school, and I sent him an email with a bunch of questions about what it was like to redshirt at Florida State. He emailed me back. It ran in the paper. That clip is somewhere in my basement, but yeah, it's funny. Yeah, he was a senior when I was a freshman, and so my first ever clip was about Christian. So, who I've heard nothing but great things about. Right, and like an incredibly smart guy. I think he got his degree in 3 years before. That was cool. So, that is. Yeah, we have had some good athletes.
Oh, wait a minute. Hold on. You guys were the Panthers, right?
Yes, correct.
Hail our Panthers. Hats off to thee. I was a Panther also. Red and black, buddy. I'll tell you what. We could, if we were like 18 years old, we could swap sweatshirts back and forth.
I'll tell you what. A lot of NFL teams will swap for our indoor facility. I'll tell you what. Our indoor and our weight room and all that. I'm not joking. You can go,
including the Bengals, right?
I'm not going to go out and say it, but our facilities are very nice.
Ben Baby, who is covering a team with facilities inferior to his high school alma mater. Ben, we appreciate the time, man, and we'll look for your coverage of this game after the fact. Colts-Bengals preseason game number 3, but very good perspective and much appreciated.
Awesome. Thank you all for having me.
All right, Ben Baby joining us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto Guest Line. We talked about it in terms of making you the smartest person in the room. For those that have asked, and thank you, Rick, thank you, Bill, and a couple of others, Eddie just told me that he has not reached out to people yet on the finalization of when the draft is going to be and everything for the fantasy draft. So apparently he'll get around to it eventually.
Hey, if you're a member of the break room, can't promise it. If you're a member of the break room and you happen to have some questions that you want to ask for fantasy football, put them in there. Perhaps Jake and I will read one or two of those as well throughout this next conversation.
Okay, there you go. Tips on how to build your roster next. back hour. My name is Jake Query. Jimmy Cook, the other voice that you hear on this program. Eddie Garrison en route to Cincinnati to see the Colts and Bengals going at it in preseason game number 3. But, Jimmy, you wanted to, and I can appreciate this. It's the time of year when everybody's maybe making those final decisions in terms of getting set for their fantasy football lineup, so we thought, why not have somebody on that can make everybody the smartest person at the water cooler, right?
Yeah, that's the goal of getting any type of edge in your fantasy football league, is talking to those that can perhaps pass along a nugget your way that makes you appear like you are the one that's going to go ahead and win your family and friends league or your office pool. Joining us now, he joins on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. He is Jeff Ratcliffe, president of FTN Fantasy, also hosts the Jeff Ratcliffe Show on Sirius XM. Jeff, happy fantasy football draft season to you. Thank you so much for making the time for us today. And let's get right down to it. If you're in, let's just say for the sake of the conversation, your type of points per reception, 12-team league out of the gate, who is on your do not draft list this year?
That's an interesting question there, Jimmy. Well, I don't actually have do not drafts until I get into the late rounds. So, anybody early on, if we're talking anywhere from rounds 1 to 10, the key is not necessarily do not draft, but it's structuring my board appropriately. So, for example, I have Devon Achane at 15 among running backs. Now, a lot of people, if you just go out to Google, you search for rankings, you find rankings for free, you're going to see him ranked a little bit higher. Now, that is by design for me. I'm not 100% convinced that an undersized back who sees roughly 12 touches per game and had historically good efficiency is going to continue on at that rate in year 2, plus the fact that they drafted Jalen Wright and they still have Raheem Mostert. So not necessarily do not draft, but more positioned on my board where I probably won't have to make that decision. But I want to say, like, a player who gets a lot of buzz, and he's a later round guy. Round 11 is typically where you'll see him go, who I have some major concerns for, is Buffalo Bills wide receiver Khalil Shakir. The concern is not a skill thing. It's the fact that in the preseason, he was not being used in 2 wide receiver sets. If you're not out there in anything other than 11 personnel, you're simply not going to play enough to produce viable fantasy numbers. So he's getting buzz as a sleeper. I am off on Khalil Shakir as a sleeper.
Okay, let's go this way in terms of, let's say, first 5 picks, Jeff. If somebody is looking at it, and I know that, we're going to go with the whole, well, it depends on who's available, et cetera, but as a general rule, when you're looking at, let's say, your first 5 selections, those positions based on depth of position and importance to a fantasy roster, you should go what, 1 through 5?
Like first 5 picks overall or first 5 rounds for your team?
The first 5 that you will be making. So your first 5 rounds, you should go with what positions, 1 through 5?
The position I want to be most robust at is wide receiver. That flies contrary to the traditional running backs early and often approach. But, that was an approach that was rooted in the late 90s, early 2000s when you had, guys like Sean Alexander, Priest Holmes, Larry Johnson after Priest Holmes, LaDainian Tomlinson, and so on, carrying the ball 350, 400 times almost in a season. Last year, the top in touches was Christian McCaffrey. Touches, not carries, with 339. It's just a different era. And the argument that a lot of people are going to make is that there's so much value and depth at wide receiver. And while that may be true in the overall state of the position, there is not depth at elite wide receiver. I want to be, top heavy at that position. If I get a running back in the first 5 rounds, I'm cool with that. But ideally, I exit the first 5 rounds with 1 running back and 4 wide receivers. And that, for a lot of people, is outside of their comfort zone, but it really will build a more robust roster that is made to win not only in September and October, but ideally December and early January when you hoist that trophy for a fantasy championship.
And the position that is the most fungible, in other words, if you wait until, everybody else has kind of taken one where you're safe, would it be quarterback?
It is quarterback. That's spot on, yeah. And, for your audience, I hate to break it to everybody, but you're not going to get Anthony Richardson at a value. He's one of the buzz players, and rightfully so. If he stays healthy, he has an elite fantasy ceiling. We saw him play 2 full games last year. 26.5 points is what he averaged across those 2 games, which is enormous production. But, yeah, you can get value at quarterback. You can draft, like we did with Richardson last year, in the late rounds, potentially Jaden Daniels or Caleb Williams. You can now this year get Trevor Lawrence in the late rounds. Couldn't do that last year. You get Justin Herbert in the late rounds. Couldn't do that last year. You might even have somebody like Jordan Love or Brock Purdy fall to round 10. all day long. While other people are scooping up quarterbacks early, you can scoop up wide receivers, maybe running backs, might even get one of those top 6 or 7 tight ends as well.
Jeff Ratcliffe is our guest, president of FTN Fantasy and host of the Jeff Ratcliffe Show on SiriusXM. He joined us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Jeff, you mentioned how there's been that philosophical shift the last 10, 15 years of, oh man, if you don't take a running back super early, you're going to have buyer's remorse there, and you need to focus on that position. Whereas now, as you mentioned, a lot of people comfortable with waiting first 3-4 rounds before you make that selection at running back. If that is your strategy, stacking wide receivers early and then waiting to a middle round to get a running back, what names are you looking at of value there?
Ooh, that's a great question. And you never quite know who's going to fall, but if you see Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery, Aaron Jones, those type of guys fall into the middle rounds, so round 6, round 7, then those are prime names. They don't always fall, though. So, I'm looking at somebody like Najee Harris. Not sexy. You're not going to get nice pick, bro, when you put his sticker on the board. But Najee Harris has played 51 out of a possible 51 games over his first 3 years. He has 1,000-plus yard rushing seasons in all of them. He went 10, 10, and 8 in terms of total touchdowns across the last 3 years. And Jaylen Warren is going to start the season out a little banged up. Go a little bit further down the list. DeAndre Swift set up for a potential big workload in that backfield in Chicago. Ramondre Stevenson, big workload, though the team could struggle. James Conner, big workload, the team could be a little bit better. Pick your poison in the Tennessee backfield, whether it's Tajay Spears or Tony Pollard. Even the further I get down, like somebody like Chase Brown this year, you're going to draft him in probably round 8 or 9. And yes, Zach Moss should handle early down work for Cincinnati. But Chase Brown, watch him last year. He was a screen pass dynamo, and he's a little bit bigger than people realize. He carried the ball a lot at the college level, and that's an explosive offense in Cincinnati. Those are the types of picks. Like, it's really hard to hit a guy like that with that high of a ceiling at wide receiver in round 8 or 9. At running back, you can do it annually, and if you do it, I'm not going to say league winner necessarily, but boy, do you have a leg up on your opponents if you hit.
Who's your favorite rookie selection? Can be any position, because I know some people like to take the flashy rookie quarterback. Some people might be tempted to go take a rookie wide receiver. Who is your favorite rookie selection on value?
On value is the great qualifier there, because Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to go in the second round in most drafts, and I love him, but wow, is that early for a rookie. And Malik Neighbors goes a little bit earlier for my taste as well. So I'm going to go to the third of the big 3. Rome Odunze was excellent last year at Washington on a team which all 3 of those wide receivers were drafted before the end of round 3 in this year's draft. So it was an elite set of wide receivers, and he stood out. Now, we've also seen, fortunately, behind the scenes with him at Hard Knocks, him and Caleb Williams have a nice little vibe going. And yes, they have DJ Moore, and yes, they have Keenan Allen. But I don't think this is a Jackson Smith and Jigba last year where he's just overshadowed by DK and Tyler Lockett. Rome Odunze offers a profile that DJ Moore does not have and that Keenan Allen certainly does not have. So if I'm going to take a shot on one of these guys, it's Odunze, and you do not have to pay a second, or in the case of Malik Neighbors, it's probably more like a 4th-round price tag. You're getting in the middle rounds Rome Odunze, and you're getting a lot of bang for your buck there.
Okay, give me 2 Indianapolis. People always have a tendency that you get this soft spot, and you're like, you know what? I watch a lot of Colts games. I want a Colt. You mentioned Anthony Richardson. Give me 2 more Colts that are intriguing to you, either because they're sneaky going to be good, or you want to avoid them.
Okay. Well, I don't know if there's anybody I necessarily am avoid. I mean, I guess Josh Downs, unfortunately, is banged up, and I just don't know if the ceiling is necessarily there, but that's going to lead into one of the guys I think is most interesting. But before I get to that, Michael Pittman Jr. is so unappreciated by the masses. This dude is so stinking good, and people just do not realize that. With Richardson is healthy for the entire season, he can unleash some of the things that Pittman Jr. can do. He is so undervalued. You're not getting him for free necessarily, but boy, you can get him as your 3rd receiver in a lot of instances, and that's absolutely beautiful for me. But the player I'm also looking at is Adonai Mitchell. Now, I always say, if you have an organization and they draft a player with the exact same skill set as somebody who's existing on that roster, and that player is previously a starter, watch out, the days are numbered. And unfortunately, that seems like it might be the case for Alec Pierce. Mitchell has that big play upside. We saw it at Texas last year. Really stands out from that vantage point. They drafted him in the second round. He's got a lot of bang for your buck. Now, the Downs thing is the thing that's going to move around a little bit. He's getting extra playing time as a result, but I think it's only a matter of time. The cream rises to the top, and Mitchell is more the cream than Alec Pierce.
League-wide, 3 players that are big names, trendy, and you think they're fool's gold.
Oh, boy. 3 players, fool's gold. Well, I mentioned, drafting Achane a little bit too early for my taste. The challenge with that is when you draft a player at his ceiling, your expectations are often way too high. I do think Stephon Diggs is probably another one of those players, unfortunately. Like he's coming off of a season where he did struggle down the stretch last year. He still had a 100-catch season. So if you just look at the box score, you say, oh, another 100-catch season for him. It didn't quite look that way down the stretch, and there are so many mouths to feed in that offense there for Houston. I think maybe, let's see, the last one I would probably go with, unfortunately, Jalen Waddle goes way too early for my taste. It's not that I'm knocking Jalen Waddle as a player. I love the Miami offense. I love the Mike McDaniel new look. Miami Mike is my type of Mike right there. But in general, I don't know if the consistency is going to match what people are looking for if they're trying to draft him round about a top 15 fantasy receiver. I have him just outside of my top 20, so I'm not super down on him. But again, I'm going to position guys in the right spot for me, and I think people are slightly overdrafting him based on what he showed us last year.
President of FTN Fantasy, Jeff Ratcliffe, joins us. He also hosts the Jeff Ratcliffe Show on Sirius XM. He joins us on the Express Pro Tire and Auto guest line. Jeff, people talk about how you can't necessarily win your fantasy draft on draft day, but you can lose it if you get ahead of yourself in a couple different position areas, or maybe you reach on 2 or 3 spots in your early first 4 picks here or there. Where are the guys on a board that you see could be win your league guys versus if you pick them in the wrong spot, could be lose your league guys?
Well, in a lot of instances, it is quarterback that could be the place. Also, I think tight end sometimes gets over prioritized. Like Sam Laporta is awesome, no doubt about it, and he is ahead of Travis Kelce in my rankings. But I also have 3rd-round grades on those guys. If you're really trying to step up early 2nd round to lock up tight end, that could be a big-time mistake. But I honestly find that it isn't necessarily the players, but it's the overall approach that can lose you draft day. Like if you're not doing any preparation at all, you're probably not going to draft well. Like if you show up on draft day and you're the dude who's sitting there just staring at your paper every time you're up, you didn't prepare, you're not going to make good picks. If you're just drafting off of rankings and you're only drafting players because they're the highest on the board in terms of rankings, that's not a reason to draft a guy. You're probably making mistakes. If you view your roster as starters and bench, guess what? If you're drafting bench players, they are players who won't start for you. They're bench players. They don't belong on your roster. And maybe the biggest tip, and this is the obvious one that isn't so obvious to a lot of people, like it's nice to have an adult beverage or two, but if you have an adult beverage or too many, by the middle and late rounds, you make bad picks. So, maybe watch that a little bit. Have fun, of course, but, the middle and late rounds is where you build the bulk of your roster, so you want to at least have your wits about you in that range.
We appreciate the time. We will tell Eddie Garrison, our producer, to stay off of the watermelon gummy candies when he's doing his draft, or actually it might be good for us if he loads up. Okay, actually, last question then, Jeff. I assume defense and kicker are ones typically that people just kind of clean up in the end. Are there picks on either of those two that are worth making a stretch, and then you say, okay, if they're off the board, then just go back to like a fungible player there? Which ones are the ones you want to have in those 2 spots?
Nah, for me, there's none. I'm going to pick him in the very end. As much as I love Brandon Aubrey kicking a 66-yard in the preseason, come on, this dude can kick a 70-yard field goal. I'm all about that. And I moved Mike McCarthy up a little bit in my power rankings just because he went for that, and I'm not a big Mike McCarthy guy, but I love that move. But no, one thing that I will say, people do not look at week 1 opponents. Like Baltimore Ravens are in a lot of rankings the number 1 defense. They played Kansas City in week 1. No thank you, as opposed to a team like New Orleans who plays Carolina in week 1. New Orleans is a top 12 defense. They're 11 in my rankings. You'll be able to get them in the last round. They play Carolina in week 1. Easy. Now you'll probably have to drop them because they play, Dallas in week 2, but it's that streaming process. And kicker, I'm going to take a kicker on a good offense. in the last round if I have to take a kicker. I don't want to invest in it. As much as I love Brandon Aubrey, I don't want to invest in it.
He's Jeff Ratcliffe, president of FTN Fantasy and host of the Jeff Ratcliffe Show on SiriusXM. And Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong, the FTN Football Almanac is still something that fans can buy, right?
That is something they can buy. That's used to be Football Outsiders. Now it's at ftnfantasy.com by Aaron Schatz. We also have all the stuff that I do over there as well. And if you're listening right now, you want a discount, promo code RATPACK for 10% off ftnfantasy.com.
Thanks for the time, Jeff. I appreciate you, and happy drafting the rest of the way.
Thanks, guys. This was awesome.
Telling you what, kickers and defense, man. That should be your last round. And then quarterback should be like your 10th pick, right?
Yeah, I try to wait on QBs, but, sometimes you see a high-powered name like a Lamar Jackson, a Patrick Mahomes, and it's the 4th round. Can't help yourself sometimes. I get it. I understand.
But you know what they say. No one cares about your fantasy.
Correct.
But everyone cares about their own. You got plays for us?
We do.
All right, we'll do it next. Jimmy's plays of the day.
Today's plays of the day brought to you by the fine folks at Greenfield Signs and Lighting. Greenfield Signs, a professional, comprehensive sign company with 2 locations in central Indiana. They'll take your signage ideals, take hold of the project, all the way from design to delivery. They're family-owned and managed for more than 4 generations. Go to more on greenfieldsigns.com. Today's plays of the day featured all around baseball. We'll take the Orioles to win the money line over the Houston Astros. We'll also take the Oakland Athletics to win the money line over the Tampa Bay Rays. Last one for you, we'll take the Atlanta Braves to win outright over the Philadelphia Phillies. Those are your plays of the day.
White Sox play today?
No White Sox today.
I got an email. I don't know if I told you this. White Sox season tickets reduced for next year. I kid you not.
Does that go along with your Tigers and your other ballparks you've been to the last 10 years season tickets?
That's true that packages? I can't get out of the I've tried 20 times to get out of the email list, but the White Sox 10% off now for next year because their wins this year were 70% off.
Who's your favorite White Sox player of all time?
With the open disclaimer that I'm not necessarily a lifelong White Sox fan, but Ron Kittle.
Right.
No, you know what? Tim Raines. Oh, well, are we going? Can I go Bo Jackson?
Yeah.
Of guys that happen to play for the White. I mean, he's not. You don't think
I'm going to give you Ron Karkovice.
Okay.
Remember he had.
Who's your favorite Atlanta Brave all time? Yours has got to be Bob Horner.
Yeah. How about Ozzie Virgil?
That's a good one. He was a manager at one time too, wasn't he?
Ozzie
I'll go Claudel Washington.
Yeah, Claudel Washington's good. Andres Thomas. Gene Garber.
Gene Garber's a good one.
See, this is what we should do.
Rick Mailer.
See, all these jackasses do all these podcasts now. We should just do a podcast for 3 hours where we name old players. Why don't we do that? The old player broadcast.
Sure. What sport? We doing just baseball?
Anyone. Yeah. Just name something. Name a team right now. Name a team. Any team.
Utah Jazz. Mark Ivaroni.
Mark Eaton.
Mark Eaton's a great one.
Yeah. The late Mark Eaton.
Mark Eaton, by the way, Mark Eaton could only have played in Utah or the Pacific Northwest because he just looked like the brawny man, right?
When he was recruited, they knew, I should say, when he was brought in, they knew that they wanted to bring him in because they went around. He was fixing cars. It was weird because that was the same thing with Rick Smits. He was a car enthusiast and knew what he was doing. And he was under a car a long ways. His head was sticking out on one end, and the feet were sticking out on the other. Mark Eaton.
Oh, hey, we got to get that guy.
Bobby Hansen.
That's a good
back
one.
In the day.
You got a big show lined up here, John?
Lance McAllister over in Cincinnati is going to join us. We'll get loose on Joey Votto and obviously the Colts and the Bengals tonight. And Mike Chappell, and then 5 o'clock, Colts pregame huddle.
Joey Votto had a great post yesterday where he said after he announced his retirement, he got in an Uber, and the Uber driver said, "You a ball player?" And he said, "Not anymore."
Yeah. Is he top 5 player. Reds all time?
No, but
Bench,
in terms of
Rose, Morgan, Larkin.
Yeah, you get up there pretty quick then, don't you? Perez. Did you say Perez?
Tony Perez.
Perez has got to be up there.
Anybody for the Big Red Machine. Some people wouldn't say Tom Seavers, but Tom Seaver probably.
For this generation of Reds fan, though, it's not questionable, right?
Because we're all losers as well.
No, but he's been the face of the franchise for the last.
No. And I don't think he's top 5.
Klazuski. Do you put Eric Davis on the list?
Frank Robinson.
Frank Robinson's
go back
a great
there.
one. Yeah.
There's another one. Yeah,
he's a great player, though,
Klazuski.
no question. And now, in terms of representing the Reds and being linked to them, he is certainly that races him, right?
I think Dave Concepcion has been important to the Reds.
Dave Concepcion, by the way, the Kapok Tree Restaurant. When I was a kid in Florida, I went up and got Dave Concepcion. He was in there. I got his autograph. Only time I've ever seen this. He signed his name from right to left.
Yeah, Eric Davis or
Crazy.
Joey Votto.
Votto, because he was there for so long.
God, see, I can't do that though, man.
Pete
Eric Davis was
awesome,
dude.
though. No question. Pete Davis was awesome.
Gary Reedus, you could do that, but not Eric.
Eddie
Davis.
Milner, Ron Oster.
Eddie Milner was. Couple of lines, and I'm going to go out there to lead off and go for 4.
Dave Parker, baby. There's one of my favorite
the
Reds
1985 Reds. When he had to shave that beard because of the whole facial hair rule sucked, though, it did.
But, man, Dave Parker was the man. All right, John's up next. And then, of course, Colts Bengals tonight. We'll talk about it tomorrow. Thanks for listening to Query & Company.